Chapter 431. Ominous news was like a raven of vengeance that was responsible for spreading calamities. It would always come so quickly and suddenly. In just 2 short days, news of Estrada's death had already spread to all major countries' intelligence agencies. At the same time, the Holy Church also announced that they had judged Estrada to be a heretic. The entire world was shocked, and then the entire world mourned. It wasn't difficult for a person to do a good deed once, but it would be difficult to do good deeds for an entire lifetime. Holy night jobs were so popular in every country, while holy light priests and bishops received far worse treatment. That was because this job class required one to do good deeds for an entire lifetime. In fact, holy night jobs didn't even have to be paid for. It could be said that holy night jobs allowed one to travel all over the world without being suspected, and Estrada was doubtlessly the representative of the holy night job class. Estrada's time of fame was no longer reliable. However, he had always been viewed as the representative of the holy light in this world. He had always been the leader in countless calamities. When other species invaded, he would gather the allied armies of every country. When there was a plague, he would take the lead in providing aid. His nickname of Miracle Hand described how he was always able to create miracles in desperate situations. Perhaps the rulers of the major countries had a lot of opinions about the tyrannical Holy Church, but not a single person would be disrespectful to this old knight. After all, perhaps he had saved your great-grandfather, or perhaps your ancestors owed him a favor. Thanks to the countless myths and legends about him, this strongest holy knight had an incredibly high reputation among the common people. What was even rarer was that Estrada himself had absolutely no interest in power or status. Nor did he care about politics at all. Everyone who was familiar with him everyone knew that he was a friendly, harmonious, and unambitious good person. Yet, this old knight, who was known as the representative of the holy light in this world, was actually judged to be a heretic. Everyone could tell that something was wrong with this abnormal situation. At the very least, there was a problem somewhere. Estrada was personally killed by the god of holy light's incarnation? Rumors and official announcements simultaneously confirmed this nightmare. All the regional bishops and traveling holy knight furiously sent letters to the Holy Church's headquarters to inquire about the situation. However, they all received confirmation. Estrada is a heretic? Will he betray the holy light? The Holy Church's headquarters and Pope Casimir Carwins were in a terrible predicament right now. However, they couldn't come up with a lie to deny the God of Holy Light's suspicions. After all, the God of Holy Light's prophecy was right there, and nobody dared to go against the God of Holy Light's will. Thus, the incident naturally fermented. Why was Estrada killed by the God of Holy Light? What did he do? From a certain standpoint, it could be said that it made sense that the Holy Church had always been on guard against Estrada. The undying existence of a powerful individual would cause a qualitative change in the Holy Church's reputation to accumulate. Estrada was an individual who was far too dazzling. Even if he wasn't interested in power, just his existence alone would cause trouble for the organization. He blasphemed the holy light and was killed by the incarnation of a true God. The simpler the answer, the more thoughtful it was. The information contained in this answer was worth pondering. And it just so happened that Estrada had countless disciples. It was impossible to count how many disciples he had. The holy knight who joined the Holy Church because they admired him wouldn't be satisfied with such a simple answer. Countless holy knight, priests, and teaching staff all hurried over to the Holy Church's headquarters. And it just so happened that the Southern Church, which had just suffered a terrible blow, suddenly jumped out and started spreading their teachings of pure holy light. They accused the so-called God of Holy Light of being nothing more than a fake God who stole the teachings of Holy Light. The true Holy Light didn't need to worship this God, and Estrada was killed by the God of Holy Light precisely because he didn't realize the truth. The Southern Church's Pope even used the name of Holy Light to guarantee that what he said was the truth. Yep, what he believed to be the truth. If this had been any other situation, the Holy Church would have been able to retort. But it just so happened that the Holy Church's original Allied armies witnessed everything that had happened. The several 100,000 Holy Light soldiers immediately disbanded. Some joined the Southern Church or the Bardi Empire, some joined their friends and family, some returned to their homeland, and some even joined the Holy Church. A deranged true god intended to slaughter mortals. Estrada's choice and resolution, as well as the fact that he had regained the Holy Light after being deprived of it, became the perfect evidence for the Southern Church. Of course, the Holy Church would think of ways to eliminate the Holy Light's influence. However, the fact that Holy Light job class members couldn't lie in the name of Holy Light made it difficult for the Holy Church to deny the truth. For a time, the situation kept getting worse and worse. Every day there would be people leaving the Holy Church. Some even lost their Holy Light because their faith was shaken. However, there were very few who managed to regain their Holy Light, which made the teachings of pure Holy Light seem like the truth. And it just so happened that the fairies, who had always been neutral, stabbed the Holy Church in the back. The fairies were one of the few species that didn't fear the god of Holy Light at all. First, they used an objective report to report what had happened. They even listed countless witnesses and testimonies to prove the most important point, that Estrada had been deprived of the right to use Holy Light by the angels and the god of Holy Light, but he had used his own abilities to reawaken the Holy Light. Of course, they also included the fact that the god of Holy Light had attempted to silence him. The most unbelievable part was that the fairies even discussed the mysteries of order and the true God. They even pointed out the connection between divine concepts, divine power, holy light, and other positive powers. Although the fairies didn't say a single word about how the god of Holy Light wasn't the only wielder of Holy Light, this was definitely a conclusion based on their knowledge. And so, the Southern Church's teachings of pure Holy Light received the support and technical support of a third party. As for why the fairies were willing to risk everything to offend the god of Holy Light, it seems that Estrada has gone insane. He intends to use a massacre to curry favor with the source of order. Not only that, he's also the strongest main god in the Order faction. If he continues to wield the throne, no matter who wins the Holy War, the mortal plane will probably end up in an even worse state than the last Holy War. We'll all starve to death. The fairies were direct victims of the last Holy War, as well as observers of multiple Holy Wars. They understood that it didn't matter who won, but the Chaos faction's maniacs were incredibly difficult to reason with. They lived by the law of the jungle. If they won, it would be only natural for them to eliminate the weak. That was why the fairies were originally inclined towards the Order faction. But it was obvious that if the god of Holy Light still had the right to speak in the Holy War, the fairies would be the losers no matter who won or lost. The situation was becoming more and more chaotic. When the Pope worriedly prayed to the true gods, he received an ambiguous and hazy divine message. We walk the path of order. The day of glory is upon us. At the same time, low-level angels kept arriving in 7 megachurches, including the Holy Church's headquarters. In 3 instances, true God's incarnations even arrived. But this time, the Church's Holy Church members didn't greet the angels with gazes of admiration. Instead, they looked at them with hostility, suspicion, and coldness. The growing suspicion brought about even more disputes and troubles. However, these cold angels and true God's incarnations only cared about what they were doing and didn't care about the mortal's intentions. As expected, the god of Holy Light still hasn't given up on him. He intends to use force. He intends to personally send souls into the cycle of reincarnation. Isn't he worried about losing faith? Right now, the Holy Knights are refusing to listen to the Holy Church's orders. The Holy Church has lost at least a third of its combat strength. In his script, sending a tremendous number of souls into the cycle of reincarnation will allow him to obtain the source of order's recognition. Sacrificing mortals in exchange for his own power level is such a good deal. Even if those mortals are destined to die, why worry about losing faith? It would be better for them to die earlier and enter his divine kingdom to become his nourishment. As long as he remains in his position and still obtains the source of order's favor, he will forever be the strongest order main god, an undefeatable existence. I knew exactly what the god of holy light wanted. I also knew that in the current situation, the god of holy light was an undefeatable existence. If he forcefully started his soul harvesting plan, it would be impossible for us to stop him. After all, the god of holy light had accumulated more than half of the power of faith in the mortal plane over the past 2,000 years. This made the god of holy light far stronger than any ordinary main god should be. In fact, I didn't even believe that any Chaos faction demon lords would be stronger than the god of holy light. Judging from how slow and mechanical he was as he always was, I felt that he was likely the stupidest main god. And if he completely merged with the source of order, he would probably do everything in his power to send even more lives into the cycle of reincarnation. In that case, the fairy's judgment was absolutely correct. The god of holy light would be an even more dangerous enemy than the Chaos faction. Is this game even playable? Forget about other people having idiotic teammates or idiotic leaders. Our leader wants us all to die, and nobody can change his leader. How are we supposed to play? Go die. As the holy war progressed, the god of holy light would likely become stronger and stronger. His direct influence in the mortal plane would also become greater and greater. Apart from the source of order's favor and the concept of holy light being amplified by the holy war, more importantly, as the elemental tide increased, the incarnations of powerful existences in the mortal plane would become stronger and stronger. Without the dimensional laws restraining them, the strongest existences would naturally be able to use their greatest power. And so, a deadlock was placed in front of me from the very start. If I didn't stop the god of holy light's soul sacrifice, a large number of lives would die, and the goddess of order would revive. Game over. If I gathered all my power and stopped the god of holy light's soul sacrifice, then I would be crushed to death like a bug. Then, he would complete his soul sacrifice in the middle of the holy war, and the goddess of order would revive. Game over as well. Just like that damned lousy game, it seemed that all choices were dead ends. That was why we decided not to choose. It's impossible to stop the god of holy light head-on. But there's a saying that's true: if the heavens close a door for you, they'll definitely open a window for you. Then, did you find that window? Not yet. This lousy world isn't a game. There's no balance at all. There were no windows to begin with, so I intend to smash the wall. That's right, going along with the god of holy light and the source of order's plans would only be a waste of energy. Only by jumping out of their logic and rules and attacking would we have a chance at victory. That was why we spent so much effort to prepare the grand plan of smashing the wall. Even Estrada was sacrificed for this. All of our sacrifices won't be in vain. As long as we have the final piece of the puzzle, we'll be able to activate the grand plan. Chapter 432. Fenbert, the capital of the Misty Mountains and the capital of the San Antonio AMU Mountains, was famous for its spice and gemstone processing industry. Fenbert was located in the middle of the mountains. Fenbert's history was quite legendary. In the beginning, this place was just a mountain village without any fertile land. The most dangerous thing about this place was the dangerous beasts that roamed the mountains. In the legends, there were also demons living in the Misty Mountains. These demons were omnipotent, but they ate humans as food. According to the legends, as long as someone walked into the mountains, they would never return. People often went missing in the mountain cities. The people in the mountains said that they were taken away by demons. However, more than 700 years ago, There was once a brave young man named Amu who walked into the mountains of his own volition. He fought against the demons and obtained the technology that made his hometown rich. The spice seeds called dragon wormwood, as well as the technology to mine and process gemstones. Amu used the large amount of wealth he obtained to build Fenbert's trading center, market, and military fortress. Not only did he become the first city lord of this city, he also became a hero that was passed down from generation to generation among his tribesmen. Gradually, even this mountain area was named after Amu. Since history was so long ago, no one took this legend seriously. After all, demons and such were unreliable to begin with. Nowadays, there were no more cases of people going missing. As for the adventurers who went into the mountains and never returned, there were more reliable explanations and guesses about what happened to them, considering the occasional roars of ferocious beasts echoing in the mountains. In the current AD era, although the environment here had changed beyond recognition, and even the gemstone mines that the Amu Mountains relied on for their livelihood had been completely mined, the dragon wormwood and gemstone processing industry were still important economic pillars for the Amu Mountains. Every year, countless merchant caravans would pass through the mountains, delivering precious gemstones, raw gemstones, spices, and finished gemstones, especially some magical gemstones that required special craftsmanship. The Amu Mountains had the best gemstone craftsmen in the entire mortal plane. However, back then, the Amu people would never have imagined that a legend would become a reality. The legendary story of their ancestor from 700 years ago had become a burden for their descendants. "Hello, we are here to collect our debt. Please fulfill the agreement that Amu made with us back then. Please return half of the wealth we obtained because of him to us. No money? Let's use the land to pay for it." Ogres did exist, and hero Amu had signed a contract with them. The treasures and technology he obtained from the demons were not free, and some of the gains were actually owed to the demons. Now that the demons had returned to the human world, they had become his creditors. Alright, speaking up to this point, perhaps everyone knew the true colors of these demons. Giant demons, so many giant demons. There are forest giant demons, snow giant demons, flame giant demons, all of them. When those repulsive great demons walked out of the misty mountains, they even brought with them a contract from many years ago. Even though it had been well kept, the words on the thin yellow paper that had been there for over 100 years were already illegible. What truly saved the contract from becoming a useless piece of paper was the great demon army that had come with it. In this mountainous region, an army of over 200,000 great demons had marched out. By now, it was likely that anyone could guess what had happened. Back then, the great demons had been defeated in the Holy War and fled to the depths of the mountains, which was how the so-called legends of the great demons came into being. However, the fact that they hadn't ventured out for so many years, to the point where there weren't even rumors about them, was enough to prove the perseverance of the great demons. According to historical records, these great demons were experts in witchcraft and primitive shamanism. There were records of them using potions and magical gems in many religious and magical rituals. Since they pursued the origin of the soul, their knowledge of herbology far surpassed that of the elves of the same generation. Knowledge was power and wealth. It was quite possible that the great demon's unique knowledge would allow a remote mountain city to flourish once again. As for why they chose Amu to sign such a contract that was obviously impossible to fulfill, as long as he is a brave warrior who has overcome countless dangers to reach the depths of the mountains, he will be able to survive in a battle against our brave warriors. So what if we give him a small gift? Our tribe isn't some barbaric tribe. We respect brave warriors. After so many years, Amu wasn't the only one who signed this 50-50 contract. However, he was the only one who truly fulfilled it. Amu is indeed a true brave warrior. Nobody knew if Amu was telling the truth or not, but the fact that he was an unfamiliar neighbor made many people feel slightly better. After all, Amu was also a hero of the tribe. being respected by an outsider also made them feel a bit better. Of course, what really made these creditors stay behind was their powerful army. A famous warrior in the mountains had been sliced in half by a great demon squad leader, and a militia of less than 3,000 had been completely annihilated in just 3 short hours. Since they couldn't defeat the great demons, nor could they resist, they could only believe whatever the great demons said. The AMU mountains were close to uninhabited mountains, so there were no imaginary enemies at all. The only forces stationed here were the city guards and militia. The former could probably deal with the troublemaking great demons, while the latter's imaginary enemies were the wild beasts in the mountains. If they wanted to organize reinforcements, they would probably need to mobilize the domain lords of several other provinces, which would take quite some time. The Holy Church and Holy Knight, who should have been proactive in dealing with this situation, got themselves into their own trouble. At the very least, it was impossible to count on them for the time being. And so, in just 2 short days, the great demons in the AMU mountains cut off all contact with human society and became vassals of the great demons. This was no longer the same as it was several hundred years ago, when there was no communication in the mountains. Merchants brought with them a new generation of culture and common sense. The great demons didn't have a good reputation. Their natural tendency to feed on other intelligent creatures terrified the great demons to the extreme. Even though the great demons claimed that they had changed their habit, the skull ornaments and sharp teeth on their necks made people feel uneasy. However, the great demons took their time and used practical actions to change the great demons' impression of the great demons. They actively distributed food on the streets, sent out beautiful great demon women to play with the children, and had veteran hunters and great demons talk about their experiences of survival in the mountains. Of course, when considering the great demon's sensitive pride, the great demons also praised the great demon's unique culture and legendary heroes. The food called breadfruit was delicious and instantly became popular in the city. The great demon's jewelry smiths, herbalists, and alchemists also received a large number of new recipes and precious ingredients. Promises like the future city of jewels and the city of art ruled by merchants and craftsmen also caused the great demons' imaginations to run wild. It had to be said that the great demons did an excellent job. This was far more effective than forcefully invading the AMU mountains. There was definitely someone capable behind all this planning and strategic support. As the great demons were strangers that the entire mortal plane was familiar with, the great demon's first appearance would have an important impact on the world. If the great demons were like the great demons in the stories, then it was likely that everyone would fight them to the bitter end. But if the great demons had a slightly gentler image, such as a friendly species that intended to blend into the world, then there would at least be less trouble. Of course, there were great demons among the great demons who accused the great demons of being fake. However, the result was that these smart people mysteriously disappeared. Large amounts of daily necessities suddenly appeared. The great demons gave out free food and gold coins, which benefited all the great demons. The great demons, who were willing to spend money, almost completed their strategic plan. Even the fairies hiding in the shadows had prepared extra papers for the great demons. Yes, almost. The problem wasn't that a certain hero or crusader suddenly appeared. San Antonio had plenty of problems to deal with, and the great demons wouldn't be able to deal with the great demons for the time being. The problem was the great demons themselves. Kill them all and bring their heads to the altar. At a certain point in time, the great demon who had been so friendly just last night suddenly transformed into a vicious villain. The great demon warriors who had been frowning and smiling earlier now had a bloodthirsty glint in their eyes as they hurled their deadly spears at the great demons. The slaughter started quite suddenly, and ended just as quickly. In less than 12 hours, hundreds of thousands of great demons began their slaughter. Of the 170,000 great demons in San Antonio, only a few thousand managed to survive or escape. Countless human heads were placed on the altars made from human skeletons. Even now, the great demons still couldn't understand why such a thing had happened. Why was it that the great demons had been talking nicely just yesterday, but now people were being killed? The entire city was covered in blood and a foul stench. The bloodthirsty great demons hunted like demons. However, the lucky survivors gathered near the city's main gate were fortunate enough to witness what happened next. All the altars were lit up one by one. Red pillars of light lit up the clouds in the sky. Even though it was daytime, the sun disappeared without a trace. When the night sky and the blood-red moon suddenly appeared in the sky, the blood on all the altars began to boil. It moved and finally merged into a purplish-red pool of blood. Under the chanting of the great demon shaman and great demon shaman, the blood pool and the blood-red moon in the sky had an inexplicable connection. As the blood-red light shone down, the blood pool seemed to transform into a living creature. It grew larger and larger, and the blood became thicker and thicker. Finally, it expanded to nearly 10 times its original size and swallowed all the remaining survivors. Those who were left at the end were either the young and strong brave ones or the wise and mature elders. They would become the best sacrifices. When the first blood-red goat-horn demon walked out of the boiling blood pool, the exhausted great demon shaman Hatley finally heaved a sigh of relief. For the sake of this scene, the great demons had destroyed their entire strategic plan. If they had still failed, then even as the leader of the Poison Spear tribe, he wouldn't have been able to survive. One by one, the goat-horn demons walked out of the blood pool. They weren't particularly tall. Their triangular goat faces were rather funny, and their hooves were similar to those of the goat-horn demons. However, the upper bodies of the goat-horn demons were completely human. The leader of the goat-horn demons, Pain, was a giant gray goat-horn demon. The moment he came out, he shook off the blood on his body and casually chewed on the remains of the sacrifices around him. After hurriedly eating his fill, he ran back to the blood pool and pushed away the great demon spellcaster. He stood by the blood pool and tore open his own arm to let out his blood. He kept chanting an incantation to expand the area of the lower plane door. They were sickled goat-horn demons. It was said that they were a special type of demonized form of the fallen goat-horn demons and ox demons. They were also a race of demons that were skilled at spellcasting. The fact that they were the first batch of vanguards spoke volumes. With the help of the goat-horn demons, the blood pool grew larger and larger. The goat-horn demons that had used up all of their magic power were directly thrown back into the blood pool by Pain. They howled in pain and turned into a puddle of blood, becoming nutrients for the blood pool. Seeing this scene, the goat-horn demons could only speed up their spellcasting. They even started mutilating their own limbs as sacrifices in order to stabilize the lower plane door as soon as possible. Finally, when the goat-horn demons hadn't jumped out of the blood pool for more than 20 minutes, a red ghostly claw suddenly reached out from the blood pool. He accidentally touched the city wall and casually grabbed a few great demons and goat-horn demons before throwing them back into the blood pool. While those unlucky goat-horn demons were still howling in pain in midair, the blood pool suddenly retreated rapidly, as if the teleportation door was about to collapse. However, Pain revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. As he hurriedly retreated, he raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl, as if he was happy. Ah! Before the unlucky goat-horn demons that were grabbed by the gigantic hand could land on the ground, the gigantic mouth that had swallowed half of the blood pool swallowed them all in one gulp. Their final screams were made through clenched teeth. The bloody sacrifices continued. The gigantic mouth that had transformed into an abyssal lord had already arrived in the mortal world. Right now, the only thing that had entered this world was the gigantic mouth that was 30 meters wide. Blood food, even more blood food. Delicious, delicious, devour, evolve. This existence that was at least a demon earl seemed to be slightly delirious. He couldn't even speak clearly. Purgatory Devourer Baturus? Why is it him? Great Witch Doctor Hatley recognized this evil and venerated existence, but he was silently dragging his feet. His original plan to negotiate with the Demon Lord was immediately cancelled. In front of this Demon Lord, it would be good enough if he could stay alive. He didn't want to send himself to his death. The Purgatory Devourer Baturus was an extremely senior Demon Lord. Although his individual strength was considered top-notch even amongst demon counts, he viewed his appetite as greater than anything else, so he was doubtlessly the worst kind of reinforcement. Perhaps Hatley's great demon army wouldn't even be enough for him to eat. Meanwhile, Baturus seemed to be stuck in the dimensional door. He kept roaring angrily, and the goat-horn demons were busy running around in an attempt to save their lord. It was obvious that these sacrifices weren't enough for such a demon lord to come to the mortal plane. However, the impatient Baturus didn't have the habit of waiting. When the goat-horn demon leader Pain spent a large amount of time persuading and explaining things to Baturus, Baturus finally shrunk back a little. At the very least, part of the blood pool's dimensional space appeared. However, his 8 blood-red eyes that were filled with hunger and desire for slaughter displayed his desire to the fullest. And so, the demons jumped out of the blood pool again. This time, it wasn't the weaklings, like the goat-horn demons that came out. Instead, it was the berserker demons, dragontail demons, devourer demons, and other slaughter demons. Some of these demons were tall and powerful, capable of shattering a giant's head with a single punch. Some of these demons had venomous wings and began searching for new prey in the sky. Although there were general classifications of demons that were skilled at evolution and devouring, each individual's evolution would be extremely strange, and their abilities would be vastly different. It could be said that there wasn't a single demon in the world that was exactly the same. If one had to find an analogy, it would be that the uglier a demon was, the stronger and more vicious it would be. All demons were the most unwelcome guests in the mortal plane. Apart from creating ruins and no man's land, they didn't know how to do anything else. The demon lord waved his whip in midair, but there was no need to do so. That was because the demon lord's eyes were filled with hunger and desire for slaughter, which was far more effective than any method of supervising the battle. The demons finished reorganizing themselves at an incredibly high efficiency, and then directly started attacking the mortal plane. They wanted to find sufficient sacrifices for their lord. A new night of slaughter had begun in advance. It's finally done. Harley heaved a sigh of relief as he hid in a corner. Since the demon lord had arrived, he and his tribe would naturally retreat. No, it would be more accurate to say that if they didn't hurry up and leave, it was highly likely that they would become snacks for the demon lord before them. Agreements? Plans? Allies? High-level demons wouldn't think so much. Their brains were filled with muscle instincts and reflexes. Satisfying their own desires was the most important thing. As for plans and whatnot, they would simply carry them out when they remembered them, and forget about them if they forgot. Losses caused by not carrying out the plan and punishment from their superiors? First of all, demons would rarely think about battle situations or strategies. Secondly, the demon lords who were able to single-handedly occupy an entire plane in the bottomless abyss all felt like they were the second most powerful existence in the world. So-called superiors didn't even exist to begin with. Rather than saying that they were companions working together for the sake of a common goal, it would be more accurate to say that they were bastards who hurriedly rushed over to the mortal plane to enjoy slaughter and flesh. And it just so happened that this incredibly simple way of thinking gave them the most suitable evolutionary path. Demons would forever grow through slaughter, but in terms of overall combat strength, the demons would have limitless potential as long as the river Styx didn't stop. They were definitely the strongest existences in all dimensions. As for whether or not eating their allies would cause damage to their plans, most hungry demon lords would think about it after eating their allies, but it would be far too late for the ogres. Damn it, I clearly supported the original plan, so why did they send me? That's right, The ogres had lost everything in the Holy War and had long since chosen the Chaos Evil Gods and the Chaos Abyss as their new masters. In fact, many ogres who had transformed into hell had been living in the lower planes for a long period of time. It was no longer possible for them to return to the mortal plane through normal means. The ogres' original plan was completely different. They should have done everything in their power to obtain the human world's recognition. At the very least, they shouldn't be treated as a major threat. They should then gradually devour the surrounding cities and lands, secretly becoming the demon army's front lines instead of such a simple and crude method of slaughtering humans. But sometimes the plan just couldn't keep up with the changes. In the end, the ogre's sudden change in strategy actually had a lot to do with Roland. Although there was no timetable for the Holy War, there were still some unspoken rules. Mortal species would have mortal enemies, while the Order gods would have mortal enemies like the Chaos Evil gods. Soldiers would fight soldiers, and generals would fight generals. Only when the enemy's general had been eliminated would they begin killing the enemy's soldiers. This unspoken rule was based on the actual situation and the abilities of both sides. The current elemental tide was still far from its peak. Sending powerful combat strength to the mortal plane would be costly, and it wouldn't be worth it, especially since the demons would be at a great disadvantage. That was why it should be time for the representative to be the front lines. But now, this unspoken rule and tacit agreement had been broken by the Order faction's main god of holy light. Not only had he sent his main god incarnation, he had also sent a large number of low-level and mid-level angels and follower gods to the mortal plane. This had doubtlessly broken the balance of power, speeding up the Holy War's progress. And so, in response, the Chaos Abyss had also sent its own vicious beasts and demon armies. The end result was that due to the butterfly effect, high-level combat strength like the demons and angels had arrived far earlier than expected. Fortunately, the relatively low-level elemental tide was still restricting the demons. Only half a demon earl and half a demon army would come as a sacrifice to the mortal plane. Even though the demons had arrived in the mortal plane, it would still be quite difficult for them to increase their combat strength and obtain even more victories. After all, there would definitely be a problem with replenishing their troop. If the Holy Church organized an expeditionary army at this time, it was likely that they would be able to swiftly eliminate this problem. But when considering the Holy Church's current desperate situation, it was better not to think too highly of it. And while the butterfly effect made the mortal plane's troubles worse and worse, the mortal plane's calamity was getting closer and closer. But right now, Roland was doing something as evil as summoning demons. He was summoning devils. Chapter 433. Dimensional Laws? Actually, it's quite easy to understand. A mature dimension is just like a large mansion with an owner. The creator is the master of the mansion, while the gods with divine concepts are the managers of the various aspects of the mansion. Some are responsible for sprinkling water, rain, while others are responsible for the workers and residents, reincarnation. If you create a job that makes the mansion run better, and you obtain the owner's approval, you'll naturally become a god. And as long as the mansion still exists, you'll naturally be undying. The Game of Space and Time, 3rd Book, Guesses on the World's Unsolved Mysteries, by Salius Solomon. Salius was known as the greatest spatial archmage of all time. His understanding of space and time was the foundation for the mage country's research in these two top-tier areas. However, when the first book, Time, and the second book, Space, became compulsory courses for all mages who studied space, time, dimensional summoning, illusion magic, and so on, the third book caused Salius's evaluation to plummet, directly turning him from a wise sage into one of the few insane mages in history. As for whether or not what Salius said was true, or whether or not the assassins sent by the church had actually killed off one of the strongest mages in the world, no one knew. However, it had already been more than 300 years since Salius last appeared in the world. And now, the third book could only be found in the circle of elderly mages. That was because Salius's explanation of the god's secrets was far too simple and easy to understand. Belief and longing required a certain amount of distance. It would be quite difficult for anyone to crazily worship someone who only burped when eating and farted when sleeping, even if Salius was indeed a god. Perhaps this was another way of saying that longing was the furthest distance from the truth. Although mages had always lacked faith in the gods, they at least knew the severity of the situation. Knowledge was power, but some things only needed to be clear about themselves. There was no need to be too extreme before breaking off relations with the god. Knowledge about dimensions, time, order, divine concepts, and so on was basically something only archmages could learn. As for the plane's laws, Old Man Salius had a more direct explanation in the forbidden third volume. Under normal circumstances, a god's true body can't reach the world of Achi. They can only remotely control their believers and avatars to indirectly command them. This is because the owner of the house didn't open the door to invite these fellows in. He's afraid that these strong and clumsy fellows will break the furniture and beat the servants. But in a special situation, the god's means of interfering with the world would be more direct. In a certain period of time, all restrictions would be removed, and outsiders could easily enter the house. Even the butlers could move around freely. Yes, that is the so-called Holy War. And according to the data we've collected and organized over the years, the rise and fall of the elemental tide has already surpassed the scope of what mortals and gods can control. This is more like an exchange mechanism between the Achi plane and the four elemental planes. During this period when the elemental tide is at its peak, the entire world seems to be renewing and replacing something. Perhaps this is a replacement mechanism for the world itself. Yep, I don't have any proof. This is only a guess. However, new species, minerals, plants, and animals that appear after every holy war seems to prove my theory. In the Holy War, there's a high chance that the previous ruler of the world will be defeated in battle, or that a large number of them will die to the point where they're no longer able to rule over the world. Their survivors will also mysteriously and naturally have a lower birth rate. On the other hand, 95% of all intelligent creatures in the entire plane will die. After the Holy War ends, the new ruler species will welcome a new generation of births, and the living space left behind by other species will become the new ruler species territory. This is just like a planned reward for the victor. The best proof of my theory isn't just the birth rate of humans after the last Holy War. It's the large number of births after the elves won the previous Holy War. They're famous for having low birth rates, and after the last Holy War, their birth rate dropped by an order of magnitude. If you look back, it's almost as if the Holy War became a necessary growth period for the world. We humans are nothing more than sacrifices. We aren't the owners of this house or world, but rather short-term tenants. In the end, we still have to give the key to the next tenant. No, if my theory is correct, even the so-called supreme gods are nothing more than relatively high-level sacrifices. Perhaps I should say that they are consumables. All of us are a part of this world, and we're all here to serve this world. The river Styx will never stop flowing, and demons and devils will never stop. As long as the heavens pillar still exists, all living beings will believe in the gods and desire to have a good place to return to after death. The Order gods will also have an endless source of faith. But compared to the Chaos faction's evil gods, such a powerful existence will have far too many limitations. At the very least, they will be controlled by the source of order. Back in the day when Roland read this, his first reaction wasn't, "Ah, that's right." Instead, it was, "Unbelievable. This guy actually didn't disappear because he knew too much?" And then, after asking others, he learned that Archmage Estrada had indeed disappeared several hundred years ago. Only then did he nod. That's right. As expected, that's how it should be. That's the ending. Back in the day in the Mage Country, Archmage Salius's theory was viewed as far too extreme. Since the third volume only stated that it was a conjecture, and the entire book was filled with guesses and guesses without any evidence to support it, naturally not many people believed it. Of course, it was impossible for it to spread. Most importantly, nobody would be able to obtain any power or knowledge from a theory that was filled with conjectures. But if it wasn't useful at all, this third volume would have long since been tossed into the library, with nobody interested in it. This traditional mage who had absolutely no interest in demonology or summoning magic had obtained many byproducts from his research. He had astonishing achievements in demon summoning, dimensional travel, and so on. In that case, it's quite easy to explain why demons and devils require blood sacrifices to come to this world. Those bloody rituals often had many requirements, but the common point was that the more shock the sacrificial offering received before death, and the more tragic the death, the better. According to my research on those rituals, the sacrificial offering's soul wouldn't be consumed, but it would vanish. There's a common saying among demons: souls are the only currency in the lower planes. In that case, where did the currency, obtained from blood sacrifices, go? I personally believe that it was paid to the Chaos Abyss or this world itself, as a toll fee and accommodation fee for demons to exist in the mortal world. I've done a series of experiments in this area and obtained some results. A simple blood sacrifice kit, a unit of measurement for souls, a method to communicate with the residents of the lower planes, a new demon-binding spell formation that was basically a loophole in the dimensional laws, and a dual-dimensional summoning method. The Archmage's research results in this area caused countless semi-god demon warlocks and summoners to feel ashamed. Their own classical subjects and research results had actually been created by a mage of another school. The best evidence for my inference is that the lowest-level demons have incredibly weak abilities, even weaker than ordinary beasts. They definitely shouldn't be restricted by the dimensional laws. However, summoning them requires a blood sacrifice, even if it's the mage's own blood. This completely goes against the mainstream elemental tide restriction theory. According to that theory, the demons shouldn't be restricted in any way. At the same time, the undead are also quite unpopular, but the undead don't need a blood sacrifice to be summoned from the undead plane. And it just so happens that the residents of the lower planes don't have to go through so much trouble to go to other planes. Perhaps the blood sacrifice itself isn't that important. In fact, it's just an application to enter a house. What it needs is the dimensional law's approval. In that case, I have yet another inference. It would have been fine if this was the end of the research, but if people continued reading until here, Duobai would exclaim in astonishment. Old Salius's disappearance was truly his own fault. It's one thing for him to play around with his own imagination, but he actually dared to write about it in a book. What did he write? He wrote The Truth About the Holy War. In that case, in the middle and late stages of the Holy War, even demons don't need to pay a toll to enter this world. Does that mean that the owner of this house sent an invitation to the demons? In that case, we should carefully think about why the owner of this house, the Order Gods, and the source of order, sent an invitation to the demons. What motives do they have? Do they want to win the Holy War? Or do they simply want to see countless lives destroyed in the Holy War, and the entire world being destroyed and rebuilt after the war? In that case, perhaps becoming the victor of the Holy War isn't necessarily a good thing. After all, they'll often become the main sacrifices in the next Holy War. Otherwise, how would they be able to gather so many soul coins? Perhaps it's not only the residents of the lower planes who need soul coins, but also those in heaven. Although there were quite a few idiots in this day and age, there were also quite a few smart ones. This was especially true for the ancient artifacts who had lived for countless years. Their long lifespans gave them limitless knowledge. At the very least, The elderly dragons who had been able to remain neutral in all the previous holy wars would definitely know something. But it was fine if they knew, but not only did Salius say it, he even wrote about it. It was evident that he was courting death. It was also worth mentioning that Salius was Marguerite's teacher's teacher. Even these unknown books were obtained from Marguerite. For the current me, having such a courting death pioneer, a senior who was worthy of respect, was truly delightful. Especially since Salius had casually written down many of his successful research results in this forbidden book, which saved me a lot of trouble. In fact, even the idea of using the dimensional foundation to summon demons, sending out invitations to other planes, was something I came up with based on Salius' theories. Yep, summoning demons and devils in the mortal plane requires a blood sacrifice. Summoning demons in other planes doesn't require that, but it's highly likely that they'll fail. The main reason is that other planes don't have enough resources, and the demons are afraid that it'll be a trap to enslave them. As for why the demons in the mortal plane aren't afraid that it'll be a trap, the flesh and souls of the mortal plane are the reason why the demons are willing to take such a risk. And if they only send their incarnations, they'll be even less of a threat. Before me was a gigantic summoning spell formation that had a radius of several dozen kilometers. This was a modified version of Salius' simple summoning spell formation. The white dragons that were flying in the sky had helped me draw it. Obtaining the white dragon's recognition was far too worthwhile. This type of summoning spell formation would be difficult for ordinary people to understand, but it would be nothing for dragons. If other dragons saw this, they would likely learn that the target of our summoning didn't exist in the world of He. No matter what, the residents of the lower planes would always be the most unwelcome type. Forget about summoning demons. They're part of our plan, after all. Demons are reasonable. What are you intending to do by summoning demons? Supreme immemorial white dragon Sam landed on the ground and transformed into his snow elf form. Not far away from the gigantic summoning spell formation was a slightly smaller one. Although this summoning spell formation was also in the lower planes, it wasn't in hell, where the devils resided. Instead, it was in a certain level of the endless chaos abyss. I'm here to help because of my personal connections. This should be the direct territory of a demon lord who's at least a demon count. Are you certain that they'll be reasonable with you and not burn you with the flames of calamity? There's no need to test her. She's trustworthy. She's the new demon Marchioness. Even if I tell you her name, you probably won't know. Besides, if I don't go find her, the flames of calamity will definitely burn me. The new demon Marchioness? The one from the Fire Sea? She and you. She should, possibly be his girlfriend? Why are you asking me a question? Oh, I get it. Youngsters are truly amazing. You actually dare to date a demon. You're afraid that she'll accidentally eat you. Right? How tall is she? 300 meters or 400 meters? If she's a fire type, she should have abyss demon flames that can burn anything, right? She's so young, but can she control them so easily? Can your tiny body take the damage if the flames go awry? Samson first looked at me like I was a warrior, but then he looked at me like I was a martyr. I felt like I couldn't take the damage. But at his reminder, my back began to sweat. I seemed to have unknowingly forgotten something again. If Eliza came later, she would be in her true demon Marchioness body, not a temporary incarnation created through an incomplete blood sacrifice. Although a complete demon Marchioness would be a reliable combat strength, if she intended to deal with me first, or accidentally stomp me to death. Oh my, you're quite self-aware. No, I should say that you've improved. You know that she'll deal with you? Silly cat, you're actually trying to hit me while I'm down. How about we modify the spell formation and at least delay it? I'm not ready yet. The black cat shook her head when she saw that the spell formation had already lit up. It's already too late. She's even more anxious than you are. She's already here. I don't know if you're ready, but she's most likely ready. Chapter 434. Demon and Devil? That's just two different ways of saying the same thing. Most residents of the mortal plane wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. After all, it was quite rare for them to meet these two existences. And even if they did meet, there wouldn't be much of a difference. They would both die anyway, and their souls would be brought to the lower planes. But in reality, the two of them were completely different creatures. Their personalities and habits were vastly different, and they were mortal enemies. In most situations, if they met each other, starting a war would definitely be their first choice. Those sly devils? Their brains are filled with schemes and calculations. Only the weak need such things. In front of me, demons, their weak bodies and laughable evil techniques are useless. Demons? Are you talking about those idiots who think with their red biceps? These foolish creatures in the world are such a waste of space. The only thing they can be proud of is that they have slightly more numbers than us. Yep, perhaps you should also add in their brute strength that matches their ugly appearances. From a certain standpoint, although they were both residents of the Chaos Abyss, the Chaos Abyss and the Bottomless Abyss were two completely different things. If you only looked at numbers, the demons didn't just have slightly more than the devils. There were at least 10 times more demons than devils. But since most of the demons were busy fighting amongst themselves, this advantage in numbers was meaningless. Devils were as sly as devils. Although there was a slightly unnecessary meaning to it, it was indeed a compliment. This also explained the most obvious characteristic of devils: slyness. Wisdom is seen as sly, short-sightedness is seen as decisive, true bravery is seen as reckless, and cowardice is seen as calm. Don't pay too much attention to the opinions of mortals, Camiltias. The origins of devils were a secret to ordinary people, but for the ancient ones, these fallen, first-generation humans, who had changed identities, weren't any secret at all. As former members of the Order faction, even though they had fallen into the Chaos Abyss, they still maintained their habits as first-generation creatures of Order. This was especially true for the 4 strongest first-generation humans who still ruled over the entire Devil world, which helped them preserve many of their old customs and power levels. As the children of Chaos, they highly valued social class and order. Although there were constant infighting within their race, they were able to cooperate with each other when necessary. For demons, it was their nature to stand in a certain position based on their abilities. If their abilities didn't match their status, a successful scheme would be seen as an honor. After all, if the inferior succeeded in defeating the superior, it probably meant that the devil's abilities were at a higher level. In a sense, the structure of their society was similar to that of a private company in modern society. Everyone seemed to be serving the company, but in fact, they were serving themselves. The easiest way to climb up the ladder was to make their superiors make big mistakes and snitch on them. Therefore, although the society of the demons was not as bloody as that of the demons, it was still exhausting and abnormally cruel. Yet, the demons enjoyed this kind of internal strife. What was worth mentioning was that the private companies that were doing quite well also had relatively stable higher-up. Unlike the demon lords and nobles who always took turns, the 9 devil lords rarely changed. Many of them were even old fellows who had existed since the first generation of humans until now. Any one of them was an existence that could cause headaches to any emperor or true god. Their schemes had caused countless kingdoms to turn into bubbles, and ancient gods to become the remains of true gods. Some people were unable to understand the goals of these devils, but perhaps it was because these devil lords only plotted schemes because their daily lives were far too boring. All they wanted was the joy of succeeding in their schemes. And now, these old fellows who caused headaches to the gods all walked in front of me and bowed to me, lowering their heads in a way that they had never lowered their heads to any god before. Little Roland, according to that existence, from now on, we shall listen to your commands. Please be at ease and use us as your tools. And as long as you are able to fulfill the long-cherished wish of our species, We shall revere you as. Cough. Got it. I stopped Camillus, the king of lies, midway through his sentence. After all, there were still white dragons around us, especially the supreme immemorial white dragon Sam. He was currently looking at us with interest, but his seemingly innocent eyes contained an unconcealable astonishment. Camillus, the oldest of the 9 devil lords, was also known as the King of Lies by others. Yet, such an existence was affectionately called Little Camillus by Ale. Just by looking at his outer appearance, nobody would believe that this polite, middle-aged gentleman before us was a devil. He had a mustache, wore a monocle, and wore a gentleman's hat. He even held a book under his arm, and his slightly cautious gaze contained a hint of sincerity. At first glance, he seemed just like a noble scholar who focused on academic research. However, if I were to list all the heroes, commoners, nobles, and kings that had been deceived by him, it would probably be thicker than a dictionary. The most ridiculous part was that it was impossible to find out his true power level or what he was skilled at in the mortal world. In other words, there was no record of him fighting at all. In that case, either everyone who saw his true power level was dead, or he didn't even need to do anything to kill anyone. The former was still understandable, but the latter was even more difficult to deal with. And it just so happened that based on the information I obtained from Ale, he probably didn't need to do anything at all. Mortal, your scheme has moved me. Even if you fail, I'll still leave a position for you by my side. However, I look forward to the day when you won't be of any use to me. King of Rebellion, Martian was also a male devil. However, unlike the King of Lies who had transformed into his human form, this devil lord who enjoyed stirring up rebellions and subjugating his superiors remained in his devil form. As for what form he took, I could only see his knees when I looked up. The pitch-black mist made it impossible to see his face and physique clearly. He seemed like a shadowy monster in the middle of a tornado. However, his dark green eyes flashed with an evil light. His deep voice echoed throughout the entire Chaos Valley, causing my ears to ring. He truly seemed like an emperor. Don't be so rude, Martian. It's not good to scare a newcomer. My dear Roland, could you tell Sister Thea about your past? Although I've heard some from him before, I still want to hear it from you. Ilmigia, the Queen of Temptations, the Queen of all lustful demons. Perhaps these demonesses who were skilled at deception and seduction weren't as famous as the demons succubi, but that wasn't because they weren't strong enough. It was because when they did things in the mortal plane, they were used to blaming their actions on succubi who had similar physical appearances and abilities. Ilmigia's voice echoed in my ears as if she was my soulmate. Although she appeared to be a gentle and cute woman, I felt that she was the most troublesome devil out of all the other devils. That was because the other devil lords wouldn't make trouble for me at such a critical moment, but Ilmigia would bring endless trouble if she got even slightly closer to me. This famous queen was more than 3 meters tall, but she didn't look fat at all. Her devilish curves were doubtlessly seductive, and her pure and cute face was as pure as an angel's. She was the perfect embodiment of an angel's face and a devil's body. Her alluring aura was right in front of me. I nodded but immediately took 2 steps back, directly indicating that I wanted to distance myself from her. This wasn't because I was a neat freak, but rather because the maid's piercing gaze behind me really gave me a headache. That's right, a maid. She was still a maid. I had previously imagined what Ilmigia would look like after she gave up on all power and transformed into a demon. Even the most conservative estimate would be that she would be a gigantic demon that was more than 100 meters tall. This wasn't because I had any prejudice against demons. It was because demons were creatures of complete chaos. They had an aura of chaos right down to their very bones. Devils had a social structure similar to a pyramid. The lower ranks could use their own hard work to achieve results and obtain the recognition and promotion of their superiors, even if it would take several hundred years. There were only two ways for the devils to obtain higher status and greater power: killing and eating. Killing everything in sight and transforming the experience gained from combat into power for growth. If this was understandable, then it would be quite troublesome for demons to devour their own species. Any demon would be capable of devouring the weak or the defeated, using their nutrition and strengths to strengthen themselves and obtain even stronger mutations. This species' ability to self-evolve seemed quite powerful, and it was actually quite powerful. However, this caused this species to never stop having internal strife. In fact, most demons viewed their own species as their number one enemy. 90% of their lives were spent fighting against demons. However, it was also because of this species' natural talent that it could be said that demons were the easiest to mass-produce among the top-level combat strength. A demon lord could be produced as long as there were enough high-level demons to kill and devour. As long as there were enough mid-level demons, there would be no lack of high-level demons. This type of growth was filled with countless unpredictable mutations and sudden situations. Not a single demon would have the exact same power and physical body. After all, not even they knew how they had eaten to such a degree. By the way, Ilmigia's sole imprint of devouring and plundering was also inextricably linked to her identity as a child of the abyss and her demon bloodline. It was precisely because of this species' natural instinct of survival of the fittest that demons fought from a young age, from the weakest imp to a demon lord. They were incredibly skilled in combat and thirsted for combat. Demons of the same power level were also the most outstanding in combat among other species. There was a joke that if demons, angels, and demons of roughly the same power level were placed together, only the victor would be able to come out. The victor would definitely be a demon, and the survivor would definitely be a devil. As for angels, you could ask those two bastard chicken wings if they tasted good. Actually, when this senseless joke spread, there were indeed some devil lords who had even more senseless reasons to try it out. However, the result was that after more than 100 experiments, more than 70% of those who came out were demons, and more than 20% were angels. That was because the so-called intelligence of the devils met the completely unreasonable demons, just like how a scholar met a soldier. The demons would usually first kill the devils before going to fight the angels. If the demons won, they would have a high chance of killing both of them. However, even if the devils barely won against the demons, they would most likely immediately die to the angels. Getting back to the main topic, demons had a devouring ability that was engraved into their very bones. Their evolution was all about becoming stronger, and fiercer. The end result would be that they would achieve their goals, and their physical bodies would be able to handle their own combat requirements and abilities. However, the negative side effects would be even uglier. Apart from succubi and other unique demons that were slightly better looking, most demon lords of the abyss had the appearance of various terrifying monsters. Their various strange abilities would be unknown until they fought them, and by the time they learned about their abilities, they would most likely have already entered the river Styx. As for the demon Marchioness that I imagined, she would at least be more than 100 meters tall with 4 or 6 legs. Her entire body would be covered in green hellfire. Her voice would be like thunder, her movement would be like an earthquake, her path would be like a volcano, and her fall would cause the ground to crack. I never expected that she would still look like this. Currently, Elisa was wearing gold-rimmed eyes. Her familiar silver hair had elven pointy ears, and her black and white maid attire was still the same style as before. It was just that the skirt that I had designed seemed slightly longer than before. Compared to before, my maid had lost her hellish characteristics like a tail and claws. She looked far more human-like than before. At the very least, I couldn't find any traces of a demon on her. Of course, this meant that she had definitely undergone a physical transformation. I wasn't an idiot. I definitely wouldn't ask her about it. The moment that I walked out of the dimensional door, I didn't even have the chance to greet her before she silently stood behind me like this. Although the demon Marchioness had given me quite a bit of face by standing there out of friendship, her demon subordinates acted as if they had seen a ghost when they saw their master's appearance. A berserker demon even viciously slapped himself with his claws, causing half of his eyeball to explode. This was especially so when I saw how the demon lords were on guard when they saw Eliza. This caused my vanity to rise slightly. But judging from the icy yet familiar gaze behind me, it seemed that I had unknowingly offended her yet again. "I'm sorry that I'm not 100 meters tall and have 4 legs. It's such a pity that I can't stomp you to death. I actually know a volcano lord that fits your requirement. I heard that he has more than 2,000 tons of meat, is more than 300 meters tall, and his hooves are covered in lava. Should I introduce him to you?" "Humph, as expected of a family. Your interests are becoming more and more similar to Beifeng's." Ah, this familiar venomous tongue really made me miss it. But I had to seriously state that I had absolutely nothing to do with Beifeng. It was already enough that there was only one man like Beifeng in the world. Another man on the calamity rankings wouldn't be enough. I was clearly a normal person. "Humph, a tree, Amelia, a slime cat, and your own half-demon relative, Renee. Your tastes are even heavier than Beifeng's." Heavier than Beifeng's tastes. This heavy blow caused me to bend over. I started to doubt my own life. However, considering that there was an important guest in front of me, this wasn't the time to be fooling around. At the very least, I maintained a solemn expression without any change in my expression. "Is the Lord of Despair here?" "His incarnation is currently on a mission. He'll probably be a bit late. You should know about that mission as well." I nodded. Of the 4 demon lords that we had agreed to meet, 3 had arrived. Not only that, they had all come in their true bodies. They were filled with sincerity. Even the last demon lord was carrying out a mission as planned. It would seem that we could directly proceed to the next step. Notify Orlos and Air. It's time for our grand plan to begin. Before I could finish speaking, the sky suddenly darkened as a gigantic black dragon poked its head out of the sky. Its scorching dragon breath blew away the clouds as countless dragons descended from the sky. It would seem that the demon lords had finally noticed that something was wrong with the situation and had come to us to question us. It would seem that we'll have to deal with the small problem before us first. Chapter 435. While the dragon world was in dire straits, the Bardi capital, which was just a wall away from the dragon world, which had existed for countless years, fell into silence. Or perhaps it should be said that it was being purged. Unlike the silence of the past, after the dragon world lost the eastern battlefront, the royal knight in the capital began to act on a large scale. The entire city was under martial law and curfew. The princes who tried to take advantage of the situation were all dragged to the streets and executed in public. The venomous scorpion emperor Orlos XIII, who seemed to have transformed into a nice guy, once again showed the world his viciousness. Halent shall become the new emperor. When the eastern battlefront was lost and a storm was brewing, the old emperor resisted all the pressure and reiterated his opinion to the Bardi citizens and domain lords. Directly opposing? Kill. Talk behind their backs? Kill. A prince colluding with a domain lord? Kill. Only complaining to his servants and friends in his own residence? Same kill. The old emperor, who always had a smile on his face, a kind old man who was even able to smile when he was being assassinated, was currently sipping tea in his study, smiling as he said, "Kill one after another." The royal knight, who was just as crazy, also silently carried out the killing missions, even if it meant hanging children who weren't even 10 years old yet on the city walls, even if it meant crushing a knight's honor and spirit. Anyone who doubts Halent's succession will be executed without question, regardless of status, age, or achievements. This was Emperor Orlos's will, and the royal knights silently carried out his will. Even if the Bardi people couldn't understand Emperor Orlos's sudden and insane actions, they were unable to directly look at the sudden slaughter, especially when the major domain lord's hostages had recently been slaughtered because they had colluded with the prince. This caused the major nobles at the border to be enraged. If this continued, the Bardi Empire would have internal strife before the Holy War's allied armies and the Undead Empire attacked. Just what was the wise old emperor doing? Was he destroying the empire that he had spent his entire life building? Even the Dragon Knight, who had always remained neutral by Halent's side, was unable to understand the old emperor's sudden madness. However, due to the knight's spirit of loyalty, he was unable to stop the old emperor. But everyone knew that this wasn't normal, and it wouldn't last long. Perhaps if things continued like this, even if Halent succeeded in inheriting the throne, as long as the old emperor died, the berserk massacres and oppression would cause Halent to suffer a tragic end. Miracle Hand's death caused everyone to sigh in amazement, sorrow, and helplessness, but it also greatly helped Halent and Bardi. The Holy Light's unstoppable will was stopped. Even if it was only for a short instant, Estrada had sacrificed himself to obtain victory for the mortals. Bardi had also lost the threat of Estrada's sharp sword, which had been so close to Bardi. This should calm the old emperor down. However, there were some things that exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only did the old emperor not stop, he even intensified his actions. Those who take advantage of the crisis to drive up prices and hoard? Kill. Someone who has a close relationship with the nobles and is related by blood? Kill. He didn't do anything, but he had a high position of authority and might affect Halent's succession in the future? Kill. Emperor Orlos had a kind expression on his face as he watched his adopted sons kill each other for 20 years. Yet, he still smiled and said the word kill as he watched the capital flow with rivers of blood. Even when Halent, the other person involved in this incident, went over to argue with him, Orlos didn't change at all. Instead, Halent locked himself in his room and refused to leave. If the future Bardi wants to survive, only Halent can inherit the throne. As for how Halent came to inherit the throne, that's not important at all. As for myself, just wait and see. In the entire Bardi Empire, only a few people were allowed to enter Orlos's study and listen to him slowly explain his thoughts. Right now, the old emperor was currently listening to the reports of the leader of the secret agents and the leader of the Night Order. Based on the information our spies have gathered, Duke Kaif and Count Bolin have both temporarily stopped gathering their private troops because they're unable to figure out your current goal. It seems that they're worried that you'll treat them as your primary target if they stand out. But some things are no different from what we predicted. As long as you leave, they'll definitely rebel. They're only temporarily stopping their actions. Those old fellows. Forget it. How's the daily trade situation in the Bardi Empire? The prices of goods are still around twice what they were before. Not bad. After a bunch of those unscrupulous merchants died, the prices of goods have become much more stable. The prices of goods have dropped from 25 times what they were before to 3 times what they were before. Not to mention, with your high-pressure policies and His Highness Halent's personally written promise, most of them have already secretly pledged their loyalty to His Highness. As long as you remove their claws and teeth, the merchants who don't have much status to begin with won't be able to do anything. At the very least, it won't be a problem for the time being. What about those useless brats of mine? Those who might be a threat have all been executed. The rest have all announced that they're no longer related to the Bardi royal family. All the princes are currently under surveillance. But in contrast to this, your reputation, some commoners are already calling you the White Dragon. White Dragon! A child-eating white dragon. Orlos nodded but didn't ask any more questions. In fact, he didn't even look at the report as he lowered his head and sipped on his tea. For someone like him who had already given up on everything, such slander was nothing to him. What he was about to do next would be even more outrageous. Perhaps he would become the #1 tyrant and idiot in all of Barty's history. But for the sake of his grand plan, what did it matter if outsiders couldn't understand or slander him? The elderly man slowly closed his eyes and didn't ask anything else. Everyone else understood and left. When the study returned to silence, 3 people walked out from the secret room. From a certain standpoint, these 3 people were the true core members of the entire Barty Empire. Pope Amoya, the first of the Southern Church, had once been the head administrator of the Barty Empire's royal court. He was Orlas's sworn brother, and Amoya was also Orlas's most trusted individual. Amoya controlled the entire Southern Church and the Barty Empire's religious power. "You've worked hard. Heh, it's already better than I expected. I'll have to trouble you with the Southern Church, thanks to Miracle Hand's sacrifice." Currently, Pope Amoya had an exhausted expression. The Southern Church had placed so much hope on the Barty Empire, but they had suffered such a heavy blow in the first battle. If it wasn't for Estrada's sacrifice, which stabilized the Southern Church's morale, it was likely that the Southern Church would have faced major problems. Another elderly mage who wore a purple Roland cloak was called the Fool. He was also the Barty Mage Guild leader, but he was unusually low-key. Very few people had seen his true appearance. Now, he finally revealed his true appearance, but he was a silver-haired old man who didn't seem special at all. But if the Holy Church's heretical judges saw him, it was likely that all the rabid dogs in the Barty Empire would come out in full force. But if Roland had been here, there would have been much more room for discussion with him. That's right, he was Salius, the mad mage Salius, the fool who knew too much yet still dared to say it. "I'm afraid that I'll have to trouble you to deal with the Mage Guild and the Mage Country. We made you break your oath and come back and, I know. There's no need to say more. Some things are fated and cannot be avoided. Since all of you are willing to gamble, how can this old man back down? But it's a pity. Back then, when Estrada forced me to swear to live in seclusion, I never thought that this day would come." The old mage who was treated as a lunatic had a head full of neat and shiny silver hair. His extravagant robe was also neat and tidy, which was rare for a mage. However, at this moment, when Salius thought about his old friend ending up in such a state, he shook his head with a pained expression. What a pity, what a pity. In the end, he could only make such an evaluation. "Teacher, my condolences. We're all the same. In a sense, he's just a step ahead of us. This is something to be happy about." Perhaps very few people knew that Orlas had studied in the Cloud Tower when he was young. In fact, he had even become the disciple of the reclusive archmage Salius with the help of some people. Emperor Orlas. The final person who got closer wasn't someone from Barty at all. It was Time's Up. The originally dazzling emerald on Lilith Milan's arm was beginning to lose its brilliance. The cracks on the emerald gradually expanded. Soon, this Gemini cat's eye emerald, which was worth tens of thousands of gold coins, would become worthless scraps. This unique magical gemstone was a pair of twin gemstones. If one was destroyed, the other would also be destroyed. This was an incredibly rare and precious communication device. The final product would require an astronomical amount of gold coins to create half a knight squadron. The fact that such a one-time use communication device could be used spoke volumes about the severity of this situation. There was only one possibility for this emerald to become scraps. Roland, who was in Dragon World, had crushed the other emerald. The entire grand scheme had been activated by Orlas. The current Lilith Milan wasn't only the representative of Roland and the Church of Law. Her familiar extravagant court attire and royal insignia doubtlessly indicated one thing: she had already returned to the Barty royalty. "Lilith. Sister, I'll have to trouble you. As one of the only 2 pure-blooded members of the Barty royalty, please temporarily act as regent for Halent before he truly matures." Lilith Milan. No, it should be said that Crown Princess Lilith, who was also the regent, nodded. If it was possible, she didn't want to get involved in such trouble at all. However, this person before her had used his own ideals and sacrifices to convince her. She felt that if she didn't do something at this time, she would be letting down her deceased family members. The old emperor looked around and sighed. He knew that this would probably be the last time he would see this study and his friends again. I never expected that after enduring for my entire life, I would still have to endure in the end. Tell me I'm not a good emperor. Of course, Your Majesty. Without you, there wouldn't be the Bardi Empire of today. Perhaps the night will be long, and perhaps countless mad dogs will come out to tear at your corpse. However, dark clouds will never be able to block out the sun forever. In the end, your reputation for wisdom will once again spread throughout this land. Pope Orlos, the former butler of the Bardi Empire, bowed slightly. His squinted eyes were filled with tears. Orlos, why be troubled by the opinions of those fools? I've always been proud of you. Salius, who wasn't good with words, paused for a moment before nodding in a certain tone. I know that you don't care about such empty reputations, but I do feel that you're amazing, even more amazing than I am. The old emperor smiled in delight at receiving the affirmation of his teacher and old friend. Perhaps the world wouldn't understand his choice, but it was enough to have one true friend in life. Wasn't it enough for him to have these two family members who understood him? That's enough. For the sake of the mortal world, allow me to destroy all the Dragon World portals. Dragon World portals? That's right, the dimensional door leading to Dragon World. If all the dimensional doors and dimensional coordinates leading to another dimension were lost, that dimension would also disappear from the mortal plane's view. And if all the dimensional doors leading to Dragon World were destroyed, that would mean that the dragons would lose their three main gathering grounds. That would also mean that the entire mortal plane would lose its connection to that dimension. This wouldn't have been possible in any ordinary plane. After all, there were countless random connections between the two planes. But the dragons just happened to be in control of this plane, so they also maintained all the dimensional gates and teleportation points, and these 3 teleportation points were all located in the Bardi Empire. They were guarded by the dragons and dragons. That's right, Evelyn was one of the guards, as well as the strongest guard. And it was obvious that the dragons had chosen the wrong person. Establishing a connection to another dimension would require a large amount of time, at least 2 or 3 years. And the Titan giants were about to revive. Once the dragons lost their reinforcements, that would mean that all the dragons in Dragon World would be doomed. This was far beyond the dragons' expectations. The dragons' wrath would definitely descend upon the Bardi Empire. And perhaps the reason why they chose Halent as the next emperor was far simpler than expected. It was simply because he had a half-dragon bloodline, and it was possible that the dragons would accept him and protect this country. As for Halent, who had committed such an incomprehensible crime, he would naturally become the dragon's target for revenge. In fact, due to the missing Roland and the Absolute Gentleman Alliance mercenary group, the Northlands countries would also become enemies with Bardi. And the most dangerous part was that the dragons would be furious at being betrayed. If they weren't satisfied with just using Orlos to vent their anger, then the entire Bardi Empire might meet its end. Orlos and Bardi wouldn't receive any benefits by risking the imminent destruction of Dragon World and committing such an evil deed. In fact, the dragons, who were supposed to be allies, would become mortal enemies, while the Northlands countries, who were supposed to be allies, would become mortal enemies, at least on the surface. In that case, just what was Orlos doing? Was it all for the sake of turning Dragon World into the Titan Giants' hunting grounds so that Bardi could get rid of this ticking time bomb? How foolish and short-sighted was this? Orlos would become the most foolish emperor in all of history. The Fool? Ha, that's quite a fitting name. Teacher, perhaps I'll become the foolish emperor in the future. No, others think that I'm wise. I just want to remind myself that I'm just an idiot who thinks that he's smart. But you've seen too clearly and too far ahead. That's why even fools will view you as an idiot. This is actually proof of your wisdom. Perhaps for someone with ulterior motives, letting a foolish scheme fail in broad daylight and hanging himself on the gallows was only to hide an even more hidden scheme. The world of mortals. It's a pity that I won't be able to see him in person. As Orlas muttered to himself, he couldn't help but recall a long conversation he had with Roland. Back then, the old emperor had said something like this. Roland, to be honest, I've always liked what you said in the Southern sect's teachings. This world belongs to mortals, and those high and mighty gods are nothing but a bunch of hypocritical fanatics. Once one side made their stance clear and opened their hearts, it would be much easier for both sides to communicate. Even Roland himself was astonished at Orlas's abilities and goals. That was why he immediately formed a bloodline alliance with Orlas. After a secret conversation that lasted the entire night, Orlas gave Roland the scheme that he had prepared for more than 10 years. Meanwhile, Roland further improved upon Orlas's plan. Finally, the so-called Grand Scheme was created. Grand Scheme? As expected of the strongest schemer in Bardi's history in the last 300 years. How daring of him! But if this scheme really succeeds, it wouldn't be wrong to call him the wisest emperor in the last 1,000 years. This was Roland's evaluation of Orlas at the time. Now, it was unknown if the wisest emperor in the last 1,000 years still existed. But Orlas, who had destroyed his own reputation step by step and handed his neck over to the guillotine, didn't hesitate, regret, or cowardly at all. Everything for the sake of the mortal world. Everything for the sake of true heaven and hell. Chapter 436. I'm different from everyone else. If there was one thing that everyone had in common, it would be that they either faintly or directly believed that they were different from everyone else, that they were special. Indeed, talent, education, and experiences were all different. But while this difference would make the world and each individual much more colorful, it wasn't necessarily a good thing. When an individual was too focused on their sense of self, it was only natural that they wouldn't be able to see the truth of others. I'm different. I was born to be above everyone else. The lives of those commoners aren't as valuable as mine. They should give everything to me. Nobles, royalty, and religious figures all had this type of expectation. Just a small amount would make them more willing to carry out their duties, but too much would make them no longer see other people as humans. Even the cruelest and most evil actions would be taken as a matter of course. I've been blessed by the god of luck. The next time, I'm definitely going to make a comeback. From a certain standpoint, gamblers and ambitious people were the same type of people. Gamblers would always believe that they would be able to make a comeback, which would make them never satisfied with what they currently had. They would constantly take risks and gamble, and in the end they would either lose their lives in chips or win everything. Everyone had this type of blind self-awareness. This was a part of human nature. There was no right or wrong in and of itself. In fact, it would even have a positive effect on a person's growth. But as one grew older and experienced more, this type of blind self-awareness would often be ground away by harsh reality. So, I am just an ordinary person, a member of the general public. There's nothing special about me. Ordinary people understood their own limits, which was why they could only helplessly give up on the wild fantasies they had when they were young. Abilities, talent, and status, these seemingly mundane things, would ultimately determine how far a person could go. But some people just happened to know from the very start where they were supposed to be, but they were still unwilling to spend their hard-to-come-by lives here. Orlas Milan was the child that his family and friends called the Jinx Orlas. But not long after he was born, he learned of his current position and his fated future, a puppet. Orlas was the 17th most powerful member of the royal family, but that didn't mean that he didn't have the right to inherit the throne. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Since he had a Grand Duke as his uncle, he was one of the top 3 most likely to inherit the throne. But when Orlas was young, his mother brought him to meet this uncle of his. This uncle looked at him abnormally coldly, as if he was a relative meeting for the first time. The way he looked at Orlas was as if he was looking at an object, as if he was looking at a tool that he could use at any time. And the way he treated Orlas and his mother afterwards was as rough as if they were goods that had already been sold for a loss. Remember, listen to me, and your life will be better. Otherwise, I can make you ascend to the throne, but I can also make you fall. For a child who longed for family love, he could not see his busy father many times, but he always heard his mother say how good his uncle was. When he first met him, this kind of situation was self-evident. But soon, he adjusted. You're just using me as a tool and puppet. Is there any difference from before? As long as I play this role well and satisfy everyone, Orlas will be a good child. The ironic part was that Orlas's uncle was far too arrogant and domineering, which angered everyone. This uncle of his was the first to be eliminated from the throne, and Orlas himself ended up being killed by his own brother. He was about to die on the street. Just as Orlas was about to die, reinforcements arrived from another dimension, allowing him to survive this calamity. Unfortunately, this assistance came with a price. From that moment onward, he learned that his country had been targeted by the undead in the shadows for over 100 years already. In fact, the undead had already infiltrated the country to the point that it was riddled with holes. As for him, what can I do? I'm still nothing more than a puppet. I've simply changed masters. From a certain standpoint, Orlas was quite enlightened. He was enlightened to the point where others would think that he was an idiot. Actually, to use what his teacher later said, it was because he saw things too clearly. And it was precisely because he saw things too clearly that no matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to change things. Naturally, he became quite cold and slow. In this world, which one of us isn't just a puppet that goes with the flow? Valuable or worthless chess pieces in the hands of the powerful. When Orlas first ascended to the throne, he was called the most wooden emperor in all of history. That was because he didn't do anything at all. Whatever his officials said, he would do. Whatever foreign officials said, as long as they had enough power behind them, Orlas would still do the same. It was as if he was nothing more than a rubber stamp that did nothing. But actually, Orlas only quietly watched over this world and its residents. He watched as these ordinary people unknowingly became chess pieces for the powerful. But what Orlas loved the most was to go on vacation in his own private residence and chat with his neighbors who didn't know who he was. Orlas felt that those ordinary people were more alive than he was. For farmers, disaster years are much better. That's because the domain lord's harshest tax officials will let the farmers live. And in times like this, the church's priests won't go to every town to preach. Farmers won't have to give up their family's wealth just so that they won't fall into the river Styx and enter the divine kingdom. For ordinary mercenaries and rangers, although the priests' divine arts are free to them, if they don't make up for it in time, nobody will save them even if they die on the streets of the Holy Church. In contrast, for ordinary people, the potions of alchemists and herbalists are the most reliable existences. The most basic healing potions don't cost much, but they're more than enough to treat ordinary people's external injuries. But for those who steal business, it's quite easy for the church to turn them into witches and mages with unfathomable intentions. That's why most pharmacists won't do things that don't make money and also offend people. The buff potions that adventurers need, the fitness potions that important people need, and the life-saving potions are the ones that make the most money. So it turns out that my citizens don't even know which emperor has succeeded the throne. They're only worried about whether or not a natural disaster will descend, whether or not the noble's tax officials will leave behind some money to save their lives, and whether or not the gold coins that they've secretly saved up will be enough to satisfy the priests and give them a blessing so that their souls can go to heaven and reincarnate into a good life in their next life. The powerful were also happy to see that the puppet emperor didn't do any proper work and just strolled around. But unknowingly, this allowed him to accumulate enough knowledge and wisdom among the common people. In fact, he even managed to form a faction of his own from the slums. And now that he had power in his hands, he felt somewhat ashamed as he looked at the commoners who were struggling to live. Since he had ascended to this position, he felt that he should do something. Perhaps I won't be able to change everything, but I can make everyone's lives a bit better. And so, the puppet emperor chose to make a deal. However, he wasn't only dealing with the undead lurking in the shadows. He was also dealing with the high and mighty dragons and Dragon Knight. And the only bargaining chip he could make was a puppet that was more obedient and useful. This was nothing more than a verbal promise. The secret assistance from the two powerful factions was quite effective. With the help of the powerful individuals who remained anonymous, the royal faction began to rise again. Then, the royal faction obtained victory in a cruel and bloody battle against the local domain lords. Orlos gradually regained his royal authority and became the emperor who wielded real power. At least on the surface, the local domain lords still seemed to respect him. But life? Isn't life still the same? I think I heard that the new domain lord is a handsome young man. I heard that he's even the king's knight. He charged double the tax the moment he arrived. That little bastard probably wants to change his castle. Old man, don't get angry and ruin your health. Nobles have always been the same for thousands of years. It's all because he was born into a good family. Orlos angrily returned to his palace. He wanted to hang that impostor who had ruined his reputation on the streets, but he didn't expect that. What? It's Kaiser Knight? Isn't he my most trusted warrior? Orlos's officials told him that the local domain lords were the only masters in their own domain. Kaiser Knight's actions were completely legal. Orlos was actually quite merciful. However, the other new knight domain lords had gone even more overboard. After all, apart from decorating their own homes, they also have to prepare a congratulatory gift for your victory. They also have to donate as much money to the royal family as the previous emperor. Your Majesty, what's the matter? Is it my fault? Did I allow all of this to happen? Right before he fainted, Orlos felt that it would be better for him to be a puppet that didn't need to do anything. After everything, it's all my fault for trying to change the world. Perhaps it's best to not do anything at all. No, I can't be so pessimistic. There must be another way. He had tried to use war to obtain spoils of war to feed the greedy domain lords, but the end result was a new cycle. The greedy domain lords had conscripted the commoners as free cannon fodder in exchange for so-called glory and military achievements. At that moment, Orlos truly felt that he had done something wrong. For the first time, he deeply considered what went wrong with this world. Why was it that no matter what he tried to change, he would always return to the beginning? He thought that the wise mages might have an answer, so he used a shadow warrior as a substitute and hid his identity to study in the cloud tower. He was fortunate enough to meet Archmage Salius, who was the most knowledgeable in this field, and became his disciple. For the first time, Orlos learned that domain lords weren't the only social system in the world. Elves, dwarves, and other species all had their own systems of survival that were more suitable for them. But in this damned world, it was the most suitable for humans to live in. The strong would protect the weak, and the weak would give everything to the strong. The desire to become strong and receive special treatment caused countless new powerful individuals to emerge. Only now did Orlos learn that Bardi was already quite a powerful country. The domain lords were even more excessive in remote mountainous areas that faced powerful threat. However, the commoners who wanted to survive had to endure. So it wasn't us who chose such a social system. Rather, such a world determined such a social system. This wasn't a problem that could be easily solved. However, Orlos just so happened to find a way to solve this problem. Yep, that was to centralize all the powerful individuals in the Bardi Empire. At the very least, after so many years, Orlos had successfully implemented his idea in the Bardi Empire. Let's not consider whether his methods were right or wrong. After all, this could only be verified by time. However, his studies in the Cloud Tower didn't get rid of his old frustrations, only new frustrations arrived. He was able to learn the truth from the mages, dragons, and undead, even if the truth was unacceptable. The Holy War? The cycle of reincarnation? What a joke! What are we humans? Wheat in the fields? Cows and sheep waiting to be slaughtered? From that moment onward, Orlos abandoned his so-called faith and the possibility of going to heaven. He began to hate the gods that were high up above yet still did nothing. You say that you're protecting the world? That your priests are also the world's servants? But I only see your priests collecting donations everywhere. Your churches are extravagant, but your servants never do any work. Every day, all they do is chant your name and praise you. Since they're all your servants, why aren't you the ones taking care of these pigs? Do you know that old John worked so hard for his entire life, even donating his final home, all so that his son could be blessed by your priests, so that he could have good luck and live 2 more years without any illnesses or disasters, so that he could go to your so-called heaven after death? A beautiful divine kingdom in heaven? I don't see that. I only see this inferno before me. Since you're unable to protect the world as you promised, then don't act like parents and interfere with this world and mortals that have nothing to do with you. Or perhaps you're just a bunch of swindlers who only promise and never give back. Or perhaps you're just shameless parasites who even swindles your so-called servants. All the nobles in the capital anxiously stood in front of that gigantic door. They had just been informed that this was the Bardi Kingdom's final trump card, a teleportation portal to the Dragon World. And now, the old emperor had summoned them to discuss some important matters. After waiting for a long time, the old emperor finally arrived. But the moment he arrived, he glanced at the extravagantly dressed crowd and smiled. From a certain standpoint, the Bardi people were already living better lives. However, this wasn't because they were relying on the high and mighty gods. Rather, it was because they were a puppet emperor who struggled against the many factions in the Bardi kingdom. He used 10 years to restore peace to this chaotic country. He made the local domain lords disband most of their private armies and made the domain lords stop fighting against each other. He used nearly 30 years to make the Holy Church and other gods' churches withdraw from Bardi with the help of the undead and dragons. He secretly began to spread the teachings of pure holy light, even though this would anger the undead. That's right, undead mages were capable of controlling their own undead creations. Even though Asso's half-dead curse, blessing, had only been effective when he saved Orlos's life in order to prevent him from revealing any flaws, Asso could still take away Orlos's life at any time, but he wouldn't be able to do anything else. After all, the Emperor now had the super archmage Salius, who even Asso didn't have any confidence in. The undead had a terrible reputation for operating in the shadows. They were unable to operate under the sun, which would directly affect the Bardi kingdom. The dragons were high and mighty. As long as the undead didn't affect their interests, they couldn't be bothered to do anything. In order to escape from Asso's control, Orlos, who was half dead, secretly put on a cursed god artifact, the Crown of Thorns. This god artifact was incredibly powerful. The Crown of Thorns forcibly transformed a half-dead into a living person. Unfortunately, this living person no longer had any sense of taste or pain. From then on, the unconscious Orlos enjoyed the most delicious food, yet tasteless. He lived in the most extravagant palace, yet he didn't feel comfortable at all. No matter how extravagant his clothing was, he couldn't feel warmth or coldness. However, this also gave him an endless amount of energy to make this country better. From a certain standpoint, Roland had helped Orlas greatly by eliminating Asso. But even without Roland's appearance, it was likely that it would only have been a matter of time before Orlas and Asso became enemies. And if you looked at history, at the very least, Asso hadn't won. As a mortal who understood his own bottlenecks, Orlas's most proficient skills were patience, borrowing power, and adapting to the situation. This was how it was in history, and it was also how it was now. Unfortunately, ideals couldn't be used to make a meal. Some things were impossible to change. Right now, even though Orlas hadn't died yet, the domain lords were getting restless. They desired a new war. They refused to allow the free citizens to migrate and abolish slavery. They were still the emperors of their own territories. Even though the gods' churches no longer existed, their believers would still travel thousands of kilometers to find priests and scammers who claimed to be priests. They would exchange their blood, sweat, and tears for the words, "Child, the gods shall bless you." At this point, Orlas was unable to obtain an answer from anyone else. However, a new religion and a pamphlet from the underground attracted his attention. No churches? No contribution fees? Then how are their priests and holy warriors supposed to survive? Acting as judges and collecting intermediary fees? Providing commercial services? They don't even need to chant the name of a god? Is this still a true God's church? If the Church of Law attracted his attention, then the teachings and God's laws within it gave him hope. Those who willfully take the lives of others for their own selfish desires shall be judged harshly by the God of law. Even after death, they shall be punished by mountains of blades and seas of fire. 13 Sins of God. I've finally met someone who intends to manage things. That was Orlas's first thought, but then he felt that something wasn't quite right. If sinners have to be judged after death, isn't that different from the true God's church's way of persuading people? Clearly, as long as they receive a priest's blessing and donate enough wealth, they'll be able to enter a true God's divine kingdom after death. Obviously, Womian's teachings were far beyond what Orlas, who was only a low god at the time, was capable of. In that case, either Womian's was spouting nonsense without caring about the consequences, or he had other intentions. Sending all sinners to hell to be punished? Although this is indeed enough to make villains fearful, this teaching is so powerful that it'll offend all the true gods. Just why is he doing this? When Orlas discovered that the Church of Law was connected to the legendary Roland, he obtained Roland's notes and manuscripts from the Church of Pure Holy Light. After communicating with Roland, Orlas finally decided to participate in Roland's insane plan. The heavens and earth are heartless, and fate has no eyes. The gods only wish to harvest faith and souls. Why would they care about how mortals live? Sinners and villains can obtain things that poor people can't even buy with their entire lives just by spending some money and praising a god's name. What need is there to believe in such a god? We mortals can only rely on ourselves. Orlas's body trembled as he stood on the stage. Behind him was the wide-open dimensional door. As he looked at the dense crowd before him, he couldn't help but recall his discussion with Roland. Roland, actually, I've always liked what you said in the Southern sect's teachings. This world belongs to mortals, and those high-up gods are nothing more than hypocritical fanatics. They're worshipped by mortals, but they're bound by their own concept. They've been restricted by the rules of order, becoming slaves in a different sense. That's why I've never counted on them from the very start. Orlas paused for a moment. He had read that sloppily written script far too many times, and he could already recite it by heart. However, what he looked forward to was what followed. He wanted to hear Roland's choice and thoughts after the passage of time. At the time, Roland had laughed as well. He could faintly see a shadow of himself in this old emperor. People of the same kind would always be able to easily communicate with each other. And so, Roland got straight to the point. The only people we can count on are ourselves. Since there's no such thing as kindness, righteousness, or morality in this world, we'll create inferior divine laws and human laws. Since the wicked and sinners of this world won't be judged or punished, then let's create a hell that sinners will fear. Even if this means becoming enemies with all the gods? Even if we become the world's public enemy? Of course. But we're not the world's public enemy. Won't you become my companion? No, since this is a criminal conspiracy with the ultimate goal of the world's order as our goal, I should say that we're accomplices. From then on, all the participants and executors of this plan, Roland, Orlos, and Evelyn, all referred to each other as accomplices. It seemed that in their eyes, this was a term more trustworthy than allies. And as Orlos chatted with his aunt, he understood even more about Lilith's stubbornness. Lilith, sister, you said that if our goal is achieved and a new cycle of reincarnation replaces the old one, that sinners will be punished in hell, and that kind-hearted people will be able to live in a beautiful paradise and truly obtain a better afterlife. In that case, people like us can directly ascend to heaven, right? To everyone's surprise, Lilith shook her head. No, that person said himself that he's already left a place for himself in hell. It's said that he hasn't even forgotten where his cat is. With how he's doing things, and considering what you've done, it's likely that you'll be neighbors with him for a very long time. Ha, that's really good news to be happy about. Orlos could still remember laughing so hard at that moment. This was the first time in so many years that he'd been so happy. Perhaps this was because this was the first time he'd heard that a criminal who had committed so many crimes was going to be punished in hell, even if that criminal was himself. Accomplices? Perhaps we'll even be prison mates in the future. Orlos's self-mockery came to an end. He knew that his time had come to an end. Perhaps, starting tomorrow, I'll become the most foolish person in the world in the eyes of the world. Still, it's not like nobody remembers me. Heh, accomplices, I'll be leaving first. I'll be waiting for you in hell. When the old man gently tore open the crown of thorns, the entire world was destined to be changed. Chapter 437. Everything started from the conversation on the river Styx. Back then, Ale was rowing a boat while seemingly chatting casually with Roland. However, they were actually talking about a super conspiracy that concerned the entire world. Chapter 66. Right, Roland? Didn't you mention the underworld and hell last time? There are even ghost soldiers? Do you know that our world has hell as well? However, it's inhabited by devils. I've talked to little TIAs about it. If the underworld really succeeds, he's willing to give up hell and let all the devils learn to be jailers. Sure, but the leader of the underworld and the highest judge must still be controlled by the completely impartial Womians. Also, just what do the devils intend to obtain from this plan? Just tell me directly, otherwise I won't be able to rest assured. Freedom. Not just on the surface but true liberation. You should know that once a high-level devil dies in another plane, it'll just be returning to hell and losing some of its power. But if they die in the lower planes, it'll be true destruction. So you're saying that they want to escape the cycle of reincarnation? Yes. Back then, in order to not participate in the so-called Holy War, my people collectively joined the goddess of chaos. But now, in every so-called Holy War, the devils are still cannon fodder. And those old fellows have long since gotten tired of the cunning life of devils and the endless battles. They want to be free, but they don't want their souls to be destroyed. But the cycle of reincarnation can be opened to any species, except high-level devils and demons. After all, they're the main force of the Holy War. How many? This can't be a decision made by the entire race. How many of the 9 devil lords agree? Including little TIAs, the 4 immemorial devil lords who were transformed from ancient humans all agreed. Of course, it's not that the others don't agree, it's just that we didn't tell them, nor do we intend to tell them. And now, the agreement from back then had become reality. For the sake of the entire race's freedom, the Lord of Lies and the Lord of Despair had decided to betray the entire Chaos faction. Countless devils walked out from the Abyss Gate. And now, when the order of reincarnation was interrupted, the Ale faction and the Order faction would become enemies. From now on, we would only have each other. None of us would have the possibility of turning back, happily waiting for Armageddon? At least for now, there is a glimmer of hope. From a certain standpoint, compared to the mighty God of Holy Light and the Order gods, our strange alliance seemed more like the antagonists. Our alliance consisted of famous tyrants, evil devil lords, undead armies, and even undead emperors who were just one step away from destroying the world, as well as the most ancient death gods who gave the gods headache. Not a single one of our antagonists was an ordinary antagonist. Every single one of them was at least at the level of a demon king. But, perhaps only the truly evil would be able to understand each other. After all, it could be said that the little villains couldn't resist temptation or that they were naturally evil. However, it would be abnormal for them to not have some astonishing resentment and legendary stories to be able to reach this level. To use a Chinibu phrase, it's all the world's fault. Little Roland, according to that existence, we will listen to your orders from now on. Please don't worry and use us as tools. And as long as you are able to complete our tribe's long-cherished wish, we shall honor you as, when we first met, I knew what the Lord of Lies meant when I interrupted him. He wanted to reconfirm the contract between me and Ale. Once the Hell of Hades was successfully created, they would become the Hell of Hades's ghost soldiers. Not only would they be able to escape from the cycle of reincarnation and the Holy War, they would also be able to fulfill their duties as part of the Hell of Hades. Right now, the mortal plane was in flames. Once the source of order and the source of chaos truly entered the Holy War, it was likely that nobody would be able to stop a large number of souls from entering the cycle of reincarnation. However, it would be possible to make these souls enter another cycle of reincarnation. This is the only method. No other cycle of reincarnation? Fine, we'll create one ourselves. This was the method we forcefully created when we were stuck in a hopeless situation. At this time, there was no longer any need to hide our so-called grand plan. My plan was to use the collapsing dragon world as material to create a Hell of Hades that belonged to ordinary life forms while being isolated from the mortal plane. This would break the River Styx and Heaven's Pillars' monopoly on the cycle of reincarnation. Only by creating a new cycle of reincarnation would the River Styx and Heaven's Pillars' cycle of reincarnation lose its effectiveness. All sacrifices would no longer be meaningless, and the damned Holy War would truly stop. We've finally reached this step. It's been so long. I never expected that there would be a day when all the conditions were fulfilled. I had ticked off all the items in my thick notebook. However, if I wanted to record everything that my companions and I had accomplished, even 10 notebooks wouldn't be enough. The preparation period for this plan was terrifyingly long. Even when I was still Emperor Yongya, I had already thought of this plan. In fact, I had even used this plan to stop Ale from hunting me down. Only after Womians ascended to godhood and I was revived did this plan truly become possible. Only after Ale and I conversed on that small boat in the River Styx did we finally decide on this plan. As long as we could eliminate this greatest hidden danger and the already destined Armageddon, all that was left was to face the Holy War. Perhaps it would still be difficult, but whether or not we could survive would depend on the abilities of ordinary people, not the Armageddon that was destined to happen. I can't guarantee that we'll be able to succeed, but at the very least, there's a possibility that we won't all die. For us, who had nowhere else to go, this was more than enough. We didn't have any more time. Estrada had sacrificed himself to save 2 million people. However, the moment the demons of chaos appeared, they sacrificed hundreds of thousands of people. And this was only the beginning. It could be foreseen that the entire mortal plane would face challenges from all sides. Such incidents would constantly occur. To be honest, I didn't have any confidence in being able to succeed. No, I should say that even if all of us worked together, it would be impossible to make up for all the loopholes. Nobody knows if a certain city lord's rationality has been taken over by the chaos evil gods, and they'll open their doors to summon a demon army the moment the sun rises. Nobody knows if a certain dimensional door will suddenly descend upon a certain country's capital. Defending is always more difficult than attacking. A single mistake can cause an avalanche. No matter how we calculate it, we'll still lose in the end. The situation is even worse than in the game's history. In the game's history, perhaps the situation wasn't as good as it was now in many aspects, but there was one aspect that we couldn't compare to: the players. That's right, don't underestimate the players. Although they were indeed nothing at the very beginning, they wouldn't die forever. They would be able to speedily grow on the battlefield as if they had cheat. Their growth speed and natural talents would make any one of them a main character in a legendary novel. Only they would be able to keep up with the ever-increasing elemental tide and their enemies. And even though these main characters were limitless and undying, they were unable to change their pitiful ending. The reason? Actually, the problem started from the very beginning. When the fuse of hatred transformed into the chains of bloody revenge, when the entire world was engulfed in the flames of war, killing would only create even more killing. Fine, that sounded a little too literary. The more the players killed, the more the cycle of reincarnation would eat. The two goddesses of order and chaos would definitely awaken, and then the game would end. We can't stop the cycle of reincarnation from its very foundation. The cycle of reincarnation that died in battle will have another place to go. No matter what we do, the Armageddon will still arrive. The result won't change. This was what we all agreed on. And we couldn't act too slowly. If the Holy War entered the middle or late stages, it would be too late. The best time to act would be right at the beginning of the Holy War, when so many things would blur the vision of the people and the gods. Prophecy magic would also lose its effectiveness due to the god of fate. This would be the best time to take advantage of the chaos. That's right. Everything finally determined the time to carry out our plan, less than half a year after the Holy War began. Obviously, doing something like this right under the nose of both sides of the Holy War would be suicidal. If both sides directly sent out Order main gods or Chaos main gods to clear out the Holy War, it would be impossible for us to resist. That was why, just as Air and I had privately discussed, our original plan was to proceed in the Devil's Hell. But now that we saw Dragon World, a world that was currently collapsing, as long as we severed Dragon World's connection to Ike and banished Dragon World to the many universes, we would have a period of time where no one would notice or disturb us before Dragon World completely collapsed. In that case, we would be able to create a new cycle of reincarnation during this short period of time. Such a plan was already far beyond what I was capable of. As for what I needed to create a new cycle of reincarnation, I had already collected them all in my notebook. And now it was time to activate it. The emerald ring on my right hand had already lost its luster. The powder that I had just crushed had long since been reduced to dust in the wind. In order to ensure that our plan wouldn't be discovered, at least not until the Dragon World's connection to the Holy War was completely cut off and the enemy still had a chance to interfere, we needed an excuse that would cause Dragon World to completely lose its connection to the Dragon World and its dimensional coordinate. An excuse that both sides of the Holy War would be able to accept, at least on the surface, so that they wouldn't start a crazy massacre. An excuse that would delay the enemy's progress, a clown that would attract the enemy's attention. Orlos, that's right, the tyrant Orlos, the sly fox Orlos, the foolish king Orlos, and the scapegoat Orlos. In order to eliminate the threat of the Titan giants, in order to show that mortals didn't need any other species' help in the Holy War, Orlos would stupidly turn against the dragons. He would angrily curse the gods in front of everyone. He would ignore his subordinates' advice and cut off Dragon World's connection to all the other dimensions. This was all part of his own plan, as well as the excuse we gave the world. After that, no matter if it was the god's divine punishment or the furious dragon's breath, he would definitely die without a proper burial. No, according to the plan, he would still need to activate the Crown of Thorns ability in order to delay his own death. He would also need to continue spouting nonsense so that he could vent more of the dragon's anger on himself instead of taking it out on others. Orlas's reputation for being wise and farsighted would transform into a symbol of idiocy. His people would view him as a disgrace, and the people he risked everything to protect would curse him, slander him, and insult him. But Orlas had seen through all of this, and he still calmly walked down this path, because this was the path with the highest possibility of success. We humans, no, all of us intelligent species are absolutely not crops that the gods can raise. Our lives and memories that we worked so hard to live belong to us. Our existence is absolutely not for the sake of being nourishment for the gods. Don't let those fake gods control our fates. Don't let the children see no hope for the future. Promise me, Roland, promise me. Orlas's raspy voice was still echoing in my ears. However, I knew that it would be impossible for us to meet again. Since Orlas had used the Crown of Thorns, he was destined to die in both body and soul. I promise you, my accomplice, from today onwards the mortal world shall belong to mortals. Perhaps we'll finally meet the Armageddon, but nobody will be able to toy with our lives anymore. Chapter 438. While the dragons were flying around in the sky, the entire ground suddenly started shaking. Fierce winds howled in anger, and all methods of communication with the mortal plane were being cut off. However, I didn't pay too much attention to the dragons in the sky. After all, compared to the enemies and troubles we were about to face, the dragons were nothing more than small troubles. Small troubles? Of course they're small troubles. If we had made enemies with the dragons yesterday, it would have been super troublesome. Perhaps all of us would have been chased out or directly killed by the dragons. But today the situation is completely different. TIA's Jr. was one of the strongest existences in the Chaos faction. He was the leader of the 9 Devil Lords and a Chaos main god. However, he was currently descending in his true body, which hadn't moved for tens of thousands of years. He had a friendly smile on his face as he placed his right hand on top of his head and greeted the dragons circling in the sky. However, not a single one of them dared to come down. Of the 9 Devil Lords, there were 3 main god-level existences, and 2 of them were on our side. Although the other main god, the Monarch of Despair, wasn't present right now, the King of Lies was more than enough to control the situation. The Order faction only had a total of 7 main gods, including the completely unreliable, neutral Ale. Meanwhile, the Chaos faction had a total of 13 main gods. Including Cavendish, there were now 14 main gods. Indeed, from an outsider's perspective, the Devil Lords were on the same level as the Death God Ale. They were incomprehensibly powerful, just like the god of holy light, demon princes, and elf main gods. Naturally, the dragons didn't dare to come down when they recognized the Devil Lords. These were existences who stood at the peak of all dimensions. Just their wills alone were capable of changing the power of the heavens and dimensional laws. Their power levels were far beyond imagination. Perhaps the dragons also had existences on par with main gods, but I didn't believe that they existed here. Otherwise, they would have used them against the Titan giants long ago. The dimensional door leading to the Chaos Abyss hadn't completely closed yet. Countless devils were streaming out. Some were tall and sturdy, while others were short and sinister. There were obvious differences in strength between each individual. This was something that devils couldn't understand due to their standard power level and species. Devils all evolved and leveled up step by step. From little devils to powerful alchemists and even devil lords, They leveled up step by step as if they were job classes. This was the most obvious difference between devils and the chaos demons. But if one thought about their backgrounds, it was quite simple. The highest citizen? In the ancient history books, the Alpine clan was the first human clan. They were generally more than 2 meters tall and sturdy. They were extremely good at fighting. In the ancient Ice Age, they only wore thin animal skin clothes to hunt powerful ancient magical beasts. Nowadays, the barbarian tribes like to emphasize that they are the descendants of the High Mountain tribe. But based on what I know, this is purely a facade. Because, other than those High Mountain tribe who have fallen into depravity, the other first-generation humans have all been exterminated by God's law and judgmenters. The Order faction would never show mercy to traitors. In that case, these countless strange devils before me were the most ancient citizens from the immemorial era. This was the only possibility that could explain why they didn't belong to the devil faction at all in terms of appearance, species, and abilities. After all, these devils existed even before the devil faction. Everyone knew that anything that was related to the word immemorial or immemorial would sound powerful even if people didn't understand it. This tremendous number of devils were all immemorial devils that had experienced countless holy wars. Just a slight calculation would make it seem frightening. And the fact that so many immemorial devils were able to survive the holy wars proved that the devil lords didn't always put in much effort. It was no wonder that the Chaos Abyss was becoming more and more fond of demons. After all, those bloodthirsty and berserk demons were absolutely qualified cannon fodder. Of course, taking such a huge risk and allowing these devils to enter this dimension was not only because I owed ale, but also because I truly needed sufficient combat strength. There was no such thing as an airtight wall in this world. True gods and even higher-level existences were no idiots. They would soon notice that something was wrong and do something about it. At the very least, until this dimension was completely cut off from the mortal plane, it would be easy to predict whether the devils would chase after them or attack them. At that time, these immemorial devils would become the Hades' personal guards. But now, these ancient devils didn't show the slightest bit of laziness or excitement upon stepping foot on this vast primitive land. Most of them were armed to the teeth, and those seemingly unarmed devils were actually even more dangerous. But after they arrived, they nervously looked to their left and right as if they were doubtful. Then, they vigilantly looked at the dragons in the sky, but didn't attack. You understand that the more people that know, the more likely it is that the information will be leaked. Right now, the order they received is only to attack a unique dimension. And, under my final order, nobody is allowed to attack. I nodded. At this moment, I also felt like the Lord of Lies before me was rather friendly. After all, we were indeed the same type of person. Of course I understand. After all, I'm the same. That's right, on our side, the only person who knew the entire plan was Harlois, who was mentally connected to me. She believed that it was impossible to hide it, so she only told Estrada and Orlos a small part of the plan. Even if they died, they wouldn't leak any information. In fact, I was worried that Eliza would leak information in the Chaos Abyss, so I didn't tell her a single word. If it wasn't for her own request, I would have thrown her into the Chaos Abyss. It seemed that I had discovered the reason why she was so angry. Getting back to the main topic, I had made so many preparations in the Northlands, allowing Renée and Glena to be able to handle the situation on their own. I also provided them with sufficiently powerful support forces, and did my best to reorganize the situation in the Northlands so that the Mist Alliance could take shape. This was so that the Mist Alliance would be able to face the increasingly grim future situation without me. Although the Mist Alliance was located far away from the Northlands, nobody knew what would happen in the future. If news of the Mist Alliance's plan leaked, it was highly likely that the Mist Alliance would receive revenge. If our plan succeeded, it would probably be several years before we returned to the Northlands. The Holy War would be at its climax by then, and the two queens would need to be able to carry the Mist Alliance's banner. But if we failed, their burdens would only be heavier. This was why I had made so many preparations in the Northlands. The Northlands was our foundation. Even if our plan succeeded, we couldn't afford to lose that place. Renee and Gleena will probably be angry if they find out. Gleena is fine. Your last attempt at teaching her was almost like your last words. She faintly guessed at something. As for Renee, I feel like she's completely in a position to be angry. She probably never even considered what her brother Roland was planning. That's right, I didn't even say a single word about the two future Northlands queens. I even hinted to Gleena that, I'll have to rely on you two in the future. Renee is far too impulsive. Take good care of her. As for Renee, I didn't even say a single word about her because I was afraid that Cavendish would be able to guess something from my words. After all, my younger brother's wild instincts were quite a headache sometimes. It seems that I really did go overboard with Renee. Now that I thought about it, considering how she was looking at me from behind, not only did I intentionally keep her away from all secrets and important matters, I even lied to her from time to time. It was all thanks to the thick-skinned Renee. If it had been the narrow-minded Eliza, I probably would have long since given her a lot of trouble. I feel like the gaze behind me is even colder now. I've even forgotten that her instincts are quite astonishing, especially when I'm speaking ill of her. Everyone be serious. We're at war. Ha, I already told you that the dragons are nothing more than minor problems. We won't be able to start a war, at least, not for the time being. The dragons were no idiots. The devil army before them was astonishingly powerful, and their leader was even a main god. Not only that, the magic contract that was supposed to be our mercenary contract was currently glowing. Naturally, the dragons felt that they had been tricked by me. Perhaps they had only been tricked by the contract, which meant that their reinforcements would still be useful. That was why, at the very least, they wouldn't be able to start a war before confirming that there was an irreconcilable conflict of interest. Finally, the situation has changed. I could only sigh. When I first arrived in Dragon World, the dragons viewed us as an unnecessary existence. Actually, for a very long time, we had always been viewed as insignificant outsiders. Originally, only the dragons and Titan giants had been fighting for this world. From the very start, we had been viewed as insignificant helpers. From Dragon City's perspective, this was indeed correct. After all, in this world, power was everything. But for our goal, this was impossible. From the very start, my goal had been this world. It would be quite troublesome to explain all of this, but from a certain standpoint, the grand plan had only just begun. It was just a simple outline with a goal in mind. And after a design goal was stated, the industrial foundation and design principles needed to achieve this goal would all need to be developed step by step. However, there was one thing that couldn't be lacking: raw materials. Starting from scratch and modifying the original foundation are two completely different difficulties. Dragon World is absolutely necessary for us. Since its physical structure is unstable, Dragon World will be the best source of world fragment. Dragon World will be the best material storage for our Hell of Hades. And this collapsing world would be the most suitable material and filler. Our next goal would be to use Dragon World as raw materials to gradually fulfill all of the steps in our plan and create a brand new world. I would probably need to start from the very beginning. I would need to talk about the foundational principles of the world. In my previous world, Eastern Buddhists believed that the four cardinal elements were all emptiness. Earth, water, fire, and wind were believed to be the foundational elements of all things. Astonishingly, in Greece, where Western civilization originated, the world had also been created from the four elements of earth, air, fire, and wind for a very long time. This seemed astonishingly similar, but there was actually a reason for it. That was because the ancient people of Ike used idealism to observe the world. They attempted to categorize all things in the world and find out their foundational properties. Then, they would analyze the foundational elements of the world in order to analyze the structure of the world. Perhaps in Ike's materialistic world, such a method of observation had already been proven to be inefficient and wrong. However, the world of Ike was a world of idealism. Magic was an existence that wasn't scientific at all. Willpower and the soul were both tangible powers, and one stubborn way of thinking was capable of creating something as unscientific as a soul world. That day, the free knowledge that my system gave me for leveling up was the nutrition that I needed the most. This knowledge was far more valuable than any treasure. Even I was unable to understand where it had come from. The foundational principles and experience of the world's construction? The very first version of the 4 elemental seals? Everything has returned to its original state? Chapter 439. There are no coincidences in the world, only certainties. I feel like you're subtly insinuating something. Then why are you saying this? The hidden meaning behind this is that if you think that the god of fortune is watching over you, that everything you do is just right, and that you're always the one who takes advantage of everything by coincidence, then it's best to first look back and see if you've already fallen into a trap. Usually, it's already too late to crawl out of the trap. You're delusional, aren't you? You're a serious conspiracy theorist. Don't be so paranoid. Otherwise, you'll go crazy one day. Alright then, let's not talk about the silly cat's comments for now. I admitted that I was a patient with persecutory paranoia. After all, I had been scammed so many times that I should have some self-awareness. But when I saw the original version of the 4 elemental seals, or perhaps I should call it the 4 elemental creation technique, I felt like something was wrong. The 4 elements? So the truth is actually so simple. What the system gave me was a piece of memory. It was the record of Ike's creation. In the beginning, there was nothing but the void. In this colorless, timeless, and disorderly space, a powerful existence was the first light that illuminated everything. Who was it? Why was it so powerful? Why did it exist here? It was likely that these were all unanswerable questions. And the beginning of this memory was when Aichi felt too lonely, so she chose to interfere with the world around her. Yes, it was Aichi. Aichi didn't have the concept of a physical body, and her understanding of herself was hazy. Perhaps even she herself didn't expect that she would become the creator goddess in the future, Aichi. Perhaps it was coincidental, or perhaps it was inevitable, but Aichi chose the 4 elemental planes as the foundation of her new world. That's right, unlike the myths and legends, Aichi didn't intentionally choose the 4 elemental planes. She simply felt that these 4 elemental planes could be used to create a new world. First of all, the Earth elemental plane was the foundation of everything, the most basic unit of construction. The Earth elemental plane itself was neither good nor evil. It simply represented whether or not something existed. Aichi was Earth, the Earth and space. The wind element was everywhere. The high-speed gales intertwined with the Earth. It represented the wind, the sky, and the corresponding concept of Earth. It represented time. Just as the white dragon Sam had said, the highest manifestation of the power of order was the power of space and time. In order to create a world, time, which represented the order of life and death, and space, which represented the scope of life and death, were indispensable. If the world was represented by coordinates, time would be the x-axis, and space would be the y-axis. Every existence must have 2 positions, or else it would be regarded as non-existent. It could be said that time and space were the ultimate order, but also the most basic order. Without it, everything would be nothingness. When time and space were fixed, the void also had land and sky, and the vague connection between them could only be understood by those great sages who pursued the source. Teleportation magic that broke through the limits of space would usually have a connection to the Earth itself. Dimensional coordinates were the foundation of everything. If this could be ignored, then the fact that time magic, which was a taboo, was actually an advanced version of wind magic, was more than enough to prove certain things. He created the world and used wind and earth to create the most basic order. From then on, wind and earth also had their own magic. What was laughable was that just like how the sky and the earth were opposite each other but would never be able to interact, the wind element and earth element naturally became mortal enemies. But just this alone was far from enough. And then, under Hi's gaze, this newly born world formed a connection with the water elemental plane. Water was the mother of all life. More than 70% of an ordinary creature's body was made up of water. Blood, which represented life force, contained up to 90% water. And in Hi's world, this connection was even more obvious. Water magic was the only magic apart from holy light and nature divine arts capable of healing and purifying life. And in Hi's world of creation, water represented life itself. It was the foundational component of all physical bodies. And the last element, fire. The never-ending flames represented evolution itself and the source of the soul. Fire was inseparable from water, yet also hostile to each other. In ancient Greece's theory of the four elements, everything was born from fire, which was why it was forever changing. As for the proof, it was even simpler. The flames actually represented a certain state, and the soul flames in the undead skeleton's pupils were the evidence that the naked eye could see. The constantly evolving spirit was dependent on the physical body, and only when the two were together could there be the possibility of evolution, and evolution was the main theme of chaos. When the two elements of order formed the foundation of the world, the two elements of chaos formed the foundation of life. Then, life was allowed to evolve on its own. This was the so-called four elements of creation. And the connection between the four elements wasn't forced. Rather, He had given it to them. As long as the four elements of time, space, life, and soul were fulfilled, they would be able to form the most basic conditions for creating a world. Since Hi's world of creation was recorded in the history of the world, the four elements themselves had a special meaning in the world of Hi. That was why the strongest sealing magic, the seal of the four elements, came into being. Not only that, there was a powerful individual who used the seal of the four elements to seal the Titan giants. It's impossible for any ordinary creature or god to simultaneously reach an incredibly high level of mastery over the four elements. Actually, there were only 3 people who could seal the Titan giants: Hi, the goddess of chaos Cynthia, and the goddess of order Astria. But now, someone had broken the creator god's monopoly and accomplished the impossible feat of creating a world. That's right, it was me. But when I was forced to my limits in the earth elemental plane, the frigid winter earth came into being. From a certain standpoint, the frigid winter earth was the embryonic form of a world, as well as an incomplete world of creation. And now that I thought about it, it wasn't just the power of holy light and the power of death that I was able to create. Perhaps the power of law and the power of ice had also helped me greatly. And it was precisely because I didn't understand the principles of creation that led to the tremendous limitations of that world. That's right, after experiencing 3 reincarnations and 4 lives, I had also gathered the 4 elements that belonged to me: holy light, law, death, and ice. And they just so happened to be composed of 2 elements of order and 2 elements of chaos. Although I couldn't compare to an existence at the level of the creator goddesses in terms of power, quantity, and quality, I indeed fulfilled the minimum requirements for creating a world. And this was also the reason why I kept saying, "This is a scheme. I feel like I've already fallen into a trap." And when I mysteriously obtained those memories from my system, and my 4 soul imprints mysteriously combined into one, and when I woke up, I mysteriously succeeded in leveling up, I would truly be an idiot if I still didn't realize something. Previously, I didn't turn on her and ask her about it because some things would be the same as flipping the table if exposed. But now I had enough trump cards in my hands, and I was about to begin my grand plan. If I didn't ask her about it, I wouldn't be able to rest easy. There are no coincidences in the world, only certainties. System, what a coincidence that I managed to gather the 4 elements with your help. And then there's that mysterious prophet. Time and space's ability to predict? And then there's the obvious power of order like equivalent exchange. Perhaps I should first address you as the most amazing prophet, as well as that venerated god's name, the most compassionate, goddess of order Astrea. I didn't receive an answer to my question, but I didn't intend to give up just like that. Some things would be impossible to turn back once they were exposed. I'd also like to ask, did you possess Roland's body like this back in the day, guiding him step by step to become the god of holy light? After a long while, I only received a sigh. Astrea is still in a deep slumber in the source of order. Perhaps I should say that her corpse is still in a deep slumber, and that only a shred of her soul remains here. While Roland was scheming against his own cheat, a certain Chaos Abyss prince was happily fishing in the 76th level of the Chaos Abyss by the Sea of Black Fog. He suddenly pulled his fishing rod with all his might, and a gigantic fish monster the size of a small mountain was suddenly pulled out of the black fog. Its gigantic body crashed into a nearby mountain, causing a large portion of it to collapse. Domain Lord! Domain Lord's head is broken. Hurry and save him. Is there a healer? All right then, perhaps Cavendish was having a great time, but the fish didn't seem to be having a great time, especially since this pitiful fish was the domain lord of this level of the Chaos Abyss. Its gigantic body couldn't breathe in or out, and the wound on its head wasn't much. The red fish hook in its mouth that couldn't be pulled out was the most fatal. The demons around it looked at this little human in fear, but it was evident that their complaints were meaningless in front of this unreasonable favorite of the Chaos Abyss. It would seem that even as a demon, Cavendish was indeed quite qualified to be able to make these unreasonable demons act like they were angry but didn't dare to say anything. How boring. I've already fished it up after only 2 hours. According to our agreement, I'm going to take your castle. What should we play next? Just as Cavendish was hesitating about whether or not he should go to the mortal plane to visit his descendants, a sudden thought caused him to stop. Hunting down a devil lord who betrayed me. I'm not going. That's too boring. I'm not interested in those sly fellows at all. Fighting with them or playing riddles to find them is so troublesome. Don't those fellows have a grudge against the King of Lies? Why don't I just let them go? The demons around him immediately distanced themselves. It was an open secret that the demon prince had a habit of talking to himself. Since there were quite a few demons who were schizophrenic or neurotic, this wasn't anything special. However, it was also common knowledge that anyone who approached him right now would be easily killed by him. It's related to my older brother? Fine, I'll go, but I can't promise anything. My older brother is too weak right now. It's impossible for him to have fun with me. You'll send people to hunt me down and let me do whatever I want? Yep, you really understand me. Having fun is the most important thing. I'll go then. Thank you, Mother Abyss. Mother Cynthia. Chapter 440. Just like before, during our one-day trip on the River Styx, when Ale and I finalized our plans, I suddenly became interested in idle chatting. Chapter 66. You've probably met the goddess of order, Astrea, and the goddess of chaos, Cynthia. What kind of existences are they? Why did they cause the eternal war? Of course, for people like us, how could we possibly be simply chatting? But how could I be at ease if I didn't take this opportunity to learn more about the final boss? What kind of personalities do they have? Just what kind of stubbornness caused them to cause the holy war? What are the characteristics of their powers? I had far too many questions that I desired answers to. In order to defeat an opponent, apart from overwhelming them with pure power, the most practical method would be to target their weaknesses. What weaknesses do they have? Is the goddess of chaos impulsive? Is the goddess of order overly conservative? Will they make mistakes? Will they personally make up for their mistakes? From a certain standpoint, directly telling me the answer to my ill-intentioned question would be the equivalent of betraying the Order faction. That was why this was nothing more than idle chatting. At that time, Ale understood. After a period of silence, he sighed helplessly and really began idle chatting. The Mother Goddess, Goddess of Order, is a good woman. She views all life as her own children. But sometimes excessive maternal love will actually limit the development of children. She wishes for all species to live the way she wishes, but how is that possible? As for Sister Cynthia, she's at the other extreme. She's naturally active and loves to watch gladiator fights and battles. She admires unyielding warriors. She wishes for her children to be able to evolve independently. Would you believe it? The immemorial demons from back in the day weren't actually evil at all. They just loved all sorts of competitive sports. Even though this was supposed to be a heart-shaking epic legend, Ale, who appeared to be the youngest, made it sound like two unfilial children from next door were fighting on the street. Even though this was supposed to be a bloody battle between the immemorial gods, he made it sound like an 8 p.m. show filled with love and hate. Thanks to the immemorial death god's description, I gained a more direct understanding of the two goddesses of order and chaos. At the very least, compared to those vague myths, I now had a more human-like understanding of these two venerated goddesses of Achi. It's like quarreling with an ordinary sister. After the parents passed away, the strict eldest sister took charge of the family business, but she was too strict with her only sister. As a result, she became more and more rebellious, and in the end, they had a falling out. However, from a certain standpoint, this was probably the most vicious sisterly quarrel in history. This sisterly quarrel lasted for such a long time, affected so many people, and left such a terrible impression that it probably exceeded the scope of any creature's understanding. You're probably the only person in the world who understands the holy war as a quarrel between sisters. When I told him my thoughts, Ale said so, but he didn't refute me. But in fact, you could also see a world war as a group of human brothers having sex. After the creator god Achi left, the core of the dispute between the Gemini goddesses was over how to manage their people. The mother goddess hopes that she can act according to the duties of her talents. She wants the shepherds to be shepherds for generations, and the descendants of the warriors to be warriors. She wants the angels to fulfill the duties of God's messengers, and the titans to be masters of architecture and art. She also wants all of her people to not fight or marry each other. Pfft, where did such a naive lady come from? When I mentioned Astria, I didn't give her any face and laughed out loud. Even considering how simple and honest the people of ancient times were, this was obviously problematic. The children of farmers would be farmers, and the children of government officials would definitely be government officials. This type of injustice would only cause social conflicts to erupt. Not to mention, it was even more ridiculous for the other species to become professional. Wasn't this an obvious example of racial discrimination? How would the conflicts and differences between species be resolved in the end? You don't say. If it was someone else who was truly messing around, Astria was confident that she would succeed. As long as everyone felt that this was only natural, wouldn't it be fine? The current angel society. You probably don't know about this, but the angels are the only species that can enter and leave the source of order. The result is that their entire species is becoming more and more order. Yep, just like I said earlier, they're basically a bunch of tools without any sense of self. That's ridiculous. Who can guarantee that such a society won't be unfair? There's no such thing as a completely fair ruler. There is. It's said that the Mother Goddess intends to give up on her sense of self and transform into pure order. However, I personally refuse to do such a thing. That's because even if society can continue like this, all individuals will doubtlessly lose their sense of self. If I could turn back time and choose again, I would still choose to betray the angels, even if the end result would be my entire species becoming demons. I nodded. If everyone was brainwashed, it would be possible to create a harmonious society. However, this would be a living hell where no one would know that they were living in a living hell. In a way, I somewhat agreed with Cynthia. At the very least, she didn't allow her older sister to mess around. And then, I immediately regretted it, but older sister Cynthia is at the other extreme. She's using a survival of the fittest system that's even more dangerous than completely ignoring everything. Isn't that the current society? It's not that simple. She believes that the goal of all life's existence is to evolve to the ultimate. And as a ruler, she should give them the soil to successfully evolve and the motivation to compete. All life should compete for their own position in the food chain. You can take a look at the current demons. That's her ideal example. Demons would begin devouring each other from birth, and their brains were probably filled with nothing but eating and killing. Perhaps their individual combat prowess was indeed superior to all other species, but these single-celled vicious lifeforms were treated as the perfect model for evolution. Was there something wrong with that? From a certain standpoint, it's actually a good thing that things from back then ended up like this. At the very least, for ordinary lifeforms, no matter if they're angels who have lost their sense of self or demons who are chaotic and evil, that's not an ideal life. And as long as either side obtains the final victory in this holy war, we'll all enjoy such a living hell. No, the Order faction will probably recreate the world and create a new species of order. The source of order has long since disliked chaotic lifeforms like humans. It's likely that the source of order will create pure creatures of order, similar to the current angels. At the very least, the Mother Goddess already had such intentions during the later stages of the Holy War, and the current behavior of the angels proves this. As for the result of the Chaos faction's victory, I don't know. But as long as Cynthia resets the world according to her intentions, it'll be impossible for ordinary lifeforms to survive. Back then, when I chatted with Ale, I once again exclaimed, "The ending will always be a terrible one if you choose either option." This has already surpassed the so-called hellish difficulty. Can this game even be played? More than that, I became even more determined to find my own team and fight by myself. Back then, I had a new idea about my personal hack, especially after I learned that time, space, fate, and other abilities were the highest-level dimensional powers of order. As I spent more time adventuring on the surface, I began to have more and more ideas about my system. Actually, there were already many suspicious points in the past. The first was probably my identity as the Child of Light. This mysterious holy light's favor would be easier to understand if I explained it as the Child of Order. Although my system's abilities were all strange, in the end, it still followed the most basic principle of equivalent exchange. None of my lucky draws were reliable. Rather than calling this a wheel of fortune, it would be more accurate to call it a wishing machine that followed the most basic principle of equivalent exchange. Such magic and divine arts did indeed exist in the mortal plane, such as the wishing pool of Ein. However, my system was obviously much more high-level. As time passed, this feeling became clearer and clearer. As I was a conspiracy theorist who would even worry about picking up a wallet on the ground as a trap, how could I not be suspicious of something as unscientific and unmagical as my system? The final confirmation came from the information that the White Dragon Sam told me not long ago. A great prophet of the Order faction? Does this have anything to do with the Order faction? Isn't prophecy supposed to be a separate magic system? Of course, this is only the ultimate power of the Order faction. Order has its own rules, and the highest level of rules are space and time. Prophecy abilities seem to have no rules at all, but they are actually the materialization of the rules of space and time. Being able to obtain more information than your opponent is the foundational reason why the Order faction's overall combat strength is always higher than the Chaos faction's. Fate is the same. Otherwise, why would the God of Fate be in the Order faction? By now, I was pretty much certain that my system was inextricably linked to the source of order. That game guide was far more detailed than any prophecy I could think of, and it was even more acceptable to me as a transmigrator. In that case, the so-called fate points were naturally an ability of the Order faction. In fact, I even guessed that perhaps in the previous Holy War, there was also a hot-blooded young man like me who obtained a cheat system and became a great prophet of the Order faction. He learned of everything that was about to happen, and with the help of my system, he finally defeated the evil demon king and became a hero. Not only did he marry a beautiful, rich, and beautiful woman, he also became a winner in life. In the end, he even ascended to godhood due to his achievements. Fine then, I was talking about the god of holy light, Roland Luashi, whose name had even been forgotten by others. But even though I guessed this, I didn't say it out loud. After all, that would be the equivalent of telling my cards on the table. And since I was an existence that would follow you even after entering the cycle of reincarnation, it would be impossible to avoid it even if I wanted to. And now, as our grand scheme had entered a critical juncture, it was time for me to tell my cards on the table. After all, we were about to become enemies with the entire Order faction. I was wrong back then, but my choice this time isn't wrong. After a moment of silence, my system spoke up in a rare serious tone, revealing a past event that had long been hidden in history. Chapter 441. When Roland finally made up his mind to have a showdown with the system, the Ottoman Empire's former capital city, which was still eternally covered in rain, was about to complete the final piece of the puzzle for the Inferno plan. Actually, although this was originally a battle between mortals, a battle between the Sea Tribe and the Bardi Empire, Lady Storm's incarnation soon interfered. This battle soon surpassed the limits of what mortals could interfere with. Damned mages! Damned humans! Her bluish-purple skin was now covered in cracks. Even her previously smooth and white face was now covered in wounds, making her originally beautiful face seem rather vicious. No wonder Lady Storm was so furious. This was already her second true god incarnation. After losing one incarnation, directly summoning a second incarnation would already be a major loss for her, and the current situation was still far from optimistic. If this incarnation was destroyed here, she would suffer a great loss. The red-haired swordsman who was currently digging his ears in a carefree manner was the target of Lady Storm's angry glare. "Mortal, mortal, 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 you dare to look down on me?" Lady Storm, who had a bad temper to begin with, was now furious. Her screams were filled with hysteria, but she didn't summon windstorms to lash at the ground like she usually did to directly kill this blasphemer. The reason? Just now, her first incarnation had been personally killed by this seemingly unremarkable mortal swordsman. His heavy sword had suddenly descended like lightning and sliced her incarnation in half, causing a large amount of divine power to explode. All the power she had accumulated over the past half a year had been reduced to nothingness. And this wasn't even the reason why she was so furious. Boom. Explosions and cannons kept ringing out in the distance. Floating airships were in formation above the water's surface, slowly launching a new wave of attacks towards the City of Rain. At this moment, most of the dark clouds in the sky had dispersed. The drizzling rain wasn't able to slow down the mortal's footstep. Although the Sea Tribe's barrier still existed on the ground, the ever-decreasing water level made the mortals feel fear. They never expected that the warm sunlight of the past would cause them so much pain. They were starting to miss the icy ocean as they faced the Bardi army's aggressiveness. In their fear and despair, they kept chanting the name of the god, but what made them feel even more despair was that the god that should have been supreme had just been killed in front of everyone's eyes. Even though the goddess of storms immediately sent out her incarnation, she was still dragged into a bitter battle by the red-haired sword saint. The mages around her all had extraordinary power, and it seemed that the incarnation of the true god was about to be defeated. Perhaps our god isn't supreme. Perhaps we can't withstand the rain. Perhaps we, the sea tribe, should live in the water. The sunlight and the rain were both weakening their confidence that they would definitely win. The Bardi Empire's sturdy ships and cannons were the most direct threat to them. The true god of storm, who was supposed to be undefeatable, had been defeated right in front of them, which was the most fatal blow to their confidence. Hurry up and run, or else it'll be too late. Why do I have to risk my life for those tribal leaders? Even if the Rain City belongs to the Seafolk, I haven't even been given a proper campfire or room. Even the venerated god has been defeated. If we don't leave now, there'll be no hope at all. The temptations of the devil echoed in everyone's ears. The original god of storms who couldn't see any hope of victory wavered. But someone suddenly shouted loudly. The high priest ran away. Look at his flag. He ran away. He's running away. High priest Melkan, who represented the goddess of storms, was also present. And right now, in the middle of the storm, his flag that was glowing with a divine blue light was indeed retreating. At this moment, someone took the lead, but the tribesmen were the first to start fleeing. And once they started fleeing, it was impossible to stop them. Mortals! The furious Lady Storm's incarnation wanted to stop them, but that heavy sword covered in lightning blocked her way. Lady, the main character has already left before the ball has even ended. That's not giving me any face. Are my techniques that bad? Taking a deep breath, Lady Storm regained her composure. At this point, it would be foolish of her not to realize that she had fallen into a trap. The mortal sword saint in front of her was indeed powerful, but he was unable to cause any harm to her. More importantly, he was also of the lightning element, which meant that he was highly resistant to her attacks. Not only that, it seemed that his abilities were also inclined towards defense, which was why she was unable to shake him off. Copy, meteor shower. A cold voice sounded from behind her. The meteor shower that descended from the sky dealt a fatal blow to the Seafolk, but it also announced the existence of Marguerite. One by one, the shining meteor shower descended. Every time one of them exploded, it would set off surging waves and countless cries of agony. Even though it wasn't as powerful as the original destructive forbidden spell, the miniature version of the copied forbidden spell was still shockingly powerful. And from the very beginning, it was the sage who unhesitatingly released the forbidden spell on the battlefield, which was why the true god's incarnation targeted him. In the end, he was killed once. And now, the second incarnation was still forced into a desperate situation. Lady Storm was unable to give up on the battle and her believers. She had just ascended to the position of a powerful god, and she had already used all her chips here. She didn't have many allies to begin with, so she had no time to retreat. Her believers were retreating, and the miracles in the sky had dissipated. The source of faith that she had overspent was beginning to feel exhausted. She was like a gambler, constantly putting the chips she had harvested into a new round of gambling. Although her winning streak had allowed her to grow rapidly, she could not afford to lose because her family was not strong enough and the gambling was getting more and more high-end, so she could not afford to lose at all. As long as she lost the City of Rain, it would be good if her divinity simply fell back. The most likely outcome would be that her power of faith would be completely exhausted, and she would instantly fall into an eternal slumber. She was quite anxious as she watched the battle situation get worse and worse. However, she didn't have the ability to protect them. Her sea monster army had long since been stopped by the mortal army. Although she was quite annoyed at the fact that this smiling mortal swordsman in front of her was so disgusting, she had to admit that he did indeed have the ability to challenge the gods. Finally, as anger and humiliation intertwined, she made a decision that everyone was looking forward to at the same time, under the shadow, two figures were conversing privately. No matter how many times I see it, I just like to see mortals collapse and despair. One of them was a seemingly childish black-haired, black-eyed youth. He was currently smiling evilly as he watched everything unfold before him. He was the messenger of despair, the devil lord from hell. And right now, he was completing the mission he had been entrusted with, which was to speed up the sea tribe's collapse. What he saw was a youth who looked exactly the same as him. This youth was happily waving the sea tribe's highest priest's military flag, while all the guards around him had already been reduced to corpses. The highest priest's head was still lying on the ground, unwilling to die. The air, which was hard to see with the naked eye, was now filled with despair and discord. As the highest-level existence in this world, the main god-level lord of despair was the embodiment of fear and despair. He could make even the strongest hero instantly collapse with just his gaze. This large-scale domain of despair was very difficult to detect. However, it would stimulate the fear and despair in the hearts of the weak. On this battlefield, everyone would have to face their own inner fear. All relationships of trust would be doubted, and all loyalty would be tortured by countless illusions. For the Lord of Despair, having the mortal army flee was nothing more than a game. The sea tribe's collapse wasn't undeserved. Heimer, you can have fun, but don't get in the way. Boss, don't rush me. You should know that she's a powerful god as well. It won't be difficult to kill off her incarnation, but it'll be quite difficult to affect her rationality and make her make foolish decisions. Oh, here it comes. It would seem that the number one crazy woman in the Southwest Seas hasn't improved much over the years. As expected, she's risking everything at such a critical moment. The person that Heimer referred to as boss was a white-robed young man. He was currently playing with a red rose. When he heard Heimer's words, Heimer also looked towards the sky. The appearance of the sky had changed once again. The dark clouds that had dispersed with great difficulty gathered again. Countless gales twisted into a ball, and dozens of giant tornadoes were forming a new group of storms. And at the place where the storm was most concentrated, a hole was vaguely opened in the sky, and the eye of the storm was peeking out from it. Looking at it from the internet, the one-eyed Storm King seemed to be reaching down from the clouds, preparing to interfere with the mortal world. The big fish has finally taken the bait. Cavendish shouldn't have existed in this world to begin with. System. Astria used this puzzling phrase to unveil the dust-covered past. Our battle against Cynthia caused us to fall into a long, deep sleep. I had heard Ale mention all of this before. In the very first Holy War, the goddesses of Chaos and Chaos, who had nearly equal power and abilities, fought to the point where neither side won. Both of them fell into a state of suspended animation. But if the two of them simply fell asleep, that would be underestimating the goddesses of Chaos and Chaos far too much. Even though their physical bodies were no longer able to revive, their divine souls could still roam this world. The so-called bottomless chaos abyss was an endless, bottomless world of chaos. That was the goddess of chaos herself. In her own personal domain, she transformed into the will of the chaos abyss and created a system for demons to level up. The summoning from the chaos abyss was something that those with inferno bloodlines were unable to resist. Every time a child that she took a fancy to appeared, she would think of a way to make that child enter the chaos abyss. Perhaps it was because of her diligence, or perhaps it was because the Chaos faction was more suited to combat than the Order faction to begin with. Not only did the Chaos faction's overall power level begin to surpass the Order factions, the Chaos faction always took the initiative in every holy war. The constant appearance of chaos and chaos in the world also gave her power, making Cynthia more and more clear-headed. Of course, this also made her crazier and crazier. The goddess of order wasn't as fortunate as her younger sister. Since she was the goddess of order, she would naturally be restricted by order's rules. Pure order didn't need a self. It only needed a ruler that wouldn't make mistakes. The end result was that the goddess of order's sense of self became thinner and weaker, to the point where she even lost contact with her physical body. And in the middle of the last holy war, pure order rejected the goddess of order's intervention. It could be predicted that even if the goddess of order revived again, she wouldn't be a goddess. Instead, she would be the incarnation of order. The past, I was wrong. Perhaps her wandering life in the mortal world had changed her. Or perhaps she had unknowingly lost her crown as the goddess of order and became a wandering ghost with no home to return to. Compared to the overly idealistic and naive young lady of the past, Astria was far more realistic and easy to deal with. However, due to her overflowing maternal love, ALS words, personality, she was still worried about this world and its citizens. That was why even if she lost her ability to directly interfere with the world, she would still think of ways to help the weaker Order faction obtain the final victory, even if that wasn't enough to solve the final problem. Unable to directly interfere? That's right, Cynthia still had the support of the entire Chaos Abyss. However, Astria was merely a will without a physical body. Her only method of interfering with the world would be to possess my body. Perhaps a nicer way of saying this would be guidance from the heavens/saints/justice, but it was actually nothing more than that. Child of fate. In every holy war, the mortal heroes will always shine brilliantly. And the person with the deepest karma will doubtlessly be the most dazzling star of that holy war. His actions will likely change the result of this holy war. Astria was basically a different kind of transmigrator. The goddess of time, space, and fate would always find the most dazzling child of fate in the river of fate before every holy war. She would give him information about the future, give him the power of the natural order, and guide him to victory. It would seem that she was the so-called great prophet of order. For example, the god of holy light from back in the day? Yes, he was a good person. That year, the situation was actually quite terrible. The demons were far more powerful than the elves. Under my guidance, the god of holy light found the essence of twisted light that was used to counter the demons and undead's natural order, holy light. At the very least, before he ascended to the throne and gave up on himself, he was a good person. Then, this time, it's me? The future Dark Knight Emperor, Demon Prince Roland? I felt rather bitter and depressed. It seemed that I still hadn't broken free from the shackles of fate. However, this mysterious depression only lasted for an instant before I shook my head and got rid of it. No matter what the reason was, it was my own choice that I had reached this point. Perhaps my system's information and assistance had helped me to a certain extent, but it was impossible for her to choose my own future for me. I wasn't weak enough to blame others for my own mistakes. Besides, I had never intended to stand on either side. That would only cause the holy war to continue forever. It would be foolish to treat the symptoms and not the root cause. Since even Yongye was unable to stop her, that meant that there was a limit to how much she could interfere with the holy war. So, why should I think too much about it? What I needed to do now was to break free from the shackles of my useless seniors and completely end this holy war. Don't be too harsh on your seniors. Not every child of fate is a transmigrator. I should say that I was astonished to learn that there was actually another world out there. Your information from another world was basically a virus. It changed my way of thinking far more than what I had experienced in countless holy wars. I admit that I was too extreme back in the day. You do have the right to be arrogant. Although your starting point was the lowest, you did the best out of all the previous children of fate. At the very least, you found a path that didn't originally exist. I saw hope in you to end the holy war. Then, what did you mean when you said that there's no Cavendish in this world? I meant exactly what I said. You should have seen the strategy I gave you. Cavendish doesn't exist in it. This is indeed a normal path of fate. Then, there's something abnormal about this? For some reason, I seem to have discovered the truth of what happened back in the day. Yes. This time, Cynthia, who had suffered at my hands, was constantly watching me. She discovered my choice. Although she doesn't have the ability to predict the future, she fought with me over the child of fate's soul, and the result was that the child of fate was split in two. However, the two damaged souls were perfected under our protection. The part with the memories of a transmigrator was affected by the power of order, and was naturally inclined towards order. Meanwhile, Cavendish was the complete opposite. He was born inclined towards chaos. His inconceivable speed of growth was completely incomprehensible. I was rendered speechless. It would seem that my younger brother and I had been lucky to have been born. At the very least, we hadn't been played to death by the goddesses of chaos in our wombs. As for the fact that we originally shared the same soul, that didn't really matter. Since we were living in this world, our memories and experiences would be different, making us two completely different individuals. It didn't matter how we were at the beginning. At most, we were just clones. Many thoughts flashed through my mind. All the clues were strung together, and I seemed to see the truth. In that case, the true culprit behind the Mist Kingdom incident. Cynthia also obtained the child of fate that she desired. It was actually quite simple to find the mastermind behind a successful scheme. All one needed to do was find the person who benefited from the Mist Kingdom's destruction. Perhaps only the Chaos faction would benefit from it. Cavendish, who was chosen by the Chaos Abyss, borrowed the power of a demon to take revenge under Cynthia's enticement. He then walked deeper and deeper into the Chaos Abyss. The transmigrator Roland, who was possessed by the goddess of order, reached the end of his road, and formed a blood feud with the Holy Church, which was the main faction of the Order faction. This was the perfect ending for the Chaos faction. At this point, it was no longer necessary to guess who had isolated the snowy mountain from the Mist Kingdom. It was either Cynthia herself, or the Chaos main god who was related to her. In the end, this grudge would still be placed on Cynthia. After thinking it over, I couldn't help but chuckle. Although I knew a lot, apart from the fact that I was closer to Cavendish than any ordinary brother, nothing else seemed to have changed. I still needed to break the cycle of reincarnation's monopoly, and I couldn't allow the two goddesses of order to truly awaken. Do you still have the power of prophecy? Not yet. Since I've already interfered with fate, it's natural that fate's trajectory is beyond my control. Useless. From today onwards, all system products will be sold at 3 times the normal price. In the end, it's still up to me to decide my own fate. Not far away, a tear in the sky suddenly appeared, along with a pungent smell of sulfur. This meant that our long-awaited guests had finally arrived. It would seem that now wasn't the time to think too much. 1, 2, 3 main god-level existences. The Chaos faction really thinks highly of us. Although there would definitely be pursuers, considering that we might not even have a chance to return, the Chaos faction was willing to send out so many main god-level existences at once. Should I say that the Chaos faction thought highly of us, or should I say that the devils were far too unpopular? Roland, I've come to play with you. Alright then, that familiar voice that sounded like he was visiting was far too familiar. Only that idiot younger brother of mine would do something like this. My head was getting more and more painful. Chapter 442. Ha, the entire sky is burning. How majestic. The air in the dragon world had never been so turbid. 2 moons hung in the sky, but they were both bright red. The mountains in the distance were already floating in the sky, and the ferocious beasts were howling helplessly in the air. An unlucky green dragon was suddenly trapped by a dimensional crack in the sky. In just a short instant it went from an adult dragon to a young dragon, then to a young dragon, and finally to a dragon egg. Time, gravity, space, and all the other fundamental laws of the world had problems. The physical constants all became random, and Dragon World was on the verge of collapse. In the sky, the white dragon Sam was roaring angrily as if he was trying to argue against something. However, the end result was that several dragon breaths almost roasted him. The supreme immemorial white dragon didn't counterattack. He just angrily landed on the ground and transformed back into his human form with a displeased expression. I told you, it's useless. As for me, I had already advised him that it would be meaningless to explain himself at this moment. These stubborn old artifacts deserved to be killed by the Titan giant. Did they really think that they'd be able to escape unscathed? The young snow elf's handsome face was filled with displeasure. However, he already knew that this would be the result, but he still wanted to try. I shrugged but didn't say anything. At the very least, I didn't know what to say. You must have thought of something like this. You actually went up to explain yourself. The dragons are furious at being tricked. It's meaningless for a traitor like you to say anything to them. The fact that you weren't directly killed only means that they weren't confident in being able to kill you. Alright, I didn't say anything, but the demon lord didn't give me any face at all. You, however, even the supreme immemorial white dragon didn't dare to turn against me. He could only look at me. Relax, I won't forget anything I promised you. The white dragons will definitely become the strongest dragon species. And what I promised you, yep, I'll fulfill. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that I had given them such a powerful bargaining chip, it would have been impossible for the white dragons to be willing to give up Dragon World. In fact, the other dragons might even hate them and want to follow me. Now that things had developed to this point, even if the dragons still wanted to remain neutral, it was impossible for them to do so. That was because even if the demons changed their attitude and didn't cause trouble for them, I had already arranged for some old friends to join them. They truly had a good relationship with Dragon City. Finally, I'm free. The ancient divine language echoed throughout the entire plain. Although no one understood this ancient tongue twister, its meaning was naturally understood by all intelligent beings. In the haze, it was as if a giant had turned over its body. The pure power of order had caused the dimension to vibrate even more intensely. The sleeping old gods had finally begun to awaken. Sam's face turned ghastly pale. It's the Titan. Yes, Titan. Looking at the panicking supreme ancient white dragon, I found it funny. It seemed that I had overestimated him. Meanwhile, the dragons in the sky were even more flustered. They really did not expect that the Titan's seal would be opened at this time, and they would face the challenge of their old enemy. You? What did you do? Even the old white dragon fell into a state of panic in the face of the archenemy in the ancient epics. Me? I didn't do anything. I just followed the plan and isolated this plane from the other world. Actually, with the white dragon Sam's knowledge and experience, he should have been able to guess what was going to happen as long as he carefully thought about it. Unfortunately, his eyes were already mesmerized by my beautiful promise, which was why he was so flustered. Actually, it was quite easy to guess. The Titan giants had been sealed in this world by the 4 elemental planes. The 4 elemental planes were still connected to the Titan giants, continuously supplying the Titan giants with the power of the seal's element. If the Titan giants were to suddenly cut off all connections to the other planes, would the 4 elemental planes be an exception? In that case, the Titan giants would lose their support and become water without a source. It was only natural that the Titan giants would soon collapse. And once the Titan giants were freed, this world that they were sealed in would naturally collapse as well. This was exactly what I wanted. Of course, in order to achieve this, just relying on mortals wouldn't be enough. Orlos was nothing more than a scapegoat. As for which powerful individual was behind all this, everyone knew, but no one would say it out loud. At the very least, back when I was in the Earth elemental plane, Orlos had successfully done this once. Of course, Sam didn't know about this, so he wouldn't have thought of this. You're basically a devil. From a certain standpoint, Sam had fallen into my trap. This time, he had completely become a traitor to Dragon City. However, I laughed at this. Did he really think that I didn't know what he was planning? His family was still in the dragon's territory. It was impossible that he intended to return to the dragon's territory after receiving his payment and remain neutral. However, it wasn't that easy to get on my ship. You wanted to leave after getting on my ship? Devil? Thank you for your praise. Thank you for your praise. Yep, I'm a devil. My response had reached a secret agreement with the Devil Lord Camilcias. I felt that it would be nice to be treated as a devil, while he felt that comparing me to a devil was a type of praise for the devils. Actually, I was becoming more and more optimistic about this little Camilcias. At the very least, he was decisive enough to know when to make a huge gamble and directly use all of his resources. The devils weren't two-faced, and I would trust them equally. Now that the situation had developed to this point, it was either a complete victory or a complete defeat. There was no room for hesitation or retreat. In the end, Sam was still a dragon's. Perhaps he was experienced enough to make certain decisions, but he was far too arrogant and naive when it came to the bigger picture. He always felt that he would be an exception, that he wouldn't need to pay much in return. He even wanted to avoid participating in this battle. Why? Because you're a dragon's? I didn't need to say anything hurtful. It was enough that I knew what I was doing. But right now, the white dragon who had been tricked by us was rather hysterical. Titans, dragons. How do you intend to end this? Old Sam had finally realized how insane we were. This time, we had completely offended the dragons, and the Titans, who were about to awaken, weren't our friends. His words were both questioning and hesitating. End this? Why? They should be the ones begging me to save them. What's the most profitable thing to do at the end of the world? Selling ship tickets. The entire world was about to collapse, but there was one place that was still stable. That's right, the Ghostwind Plains where our base was located. Soon, this place would become the core of the new world, as well as the only safe place. Anyone who wanted to take refuge here would need my permission. As for whether or not I would take this opportunity to extort money from them, wasn't that for sure? You wanted to successfully survive this Armageddon? Sure, buy ship tickets from me. I'll pay for everything. You created the Armageddon, then charged money to save people. Did the children of fate of this generation choose the wrong person? Morality should have been added to the system's evaluation long ago. Ha, I learned from you. At the very least, I wasn't the one who created this mess. Dragon World's collapse was inevitable, and I could even help clean it up myself. Alright, I finally quieted down. Wasn't the goddess of order the one who created this mess herself? She was unable to clean it up, and she even needed me to help clean it up. Just thinking about how we were able to force the Titans and Dragons to hand over all of their wealth and force them to work for us, I felt that this was already a great deal. Don't be so happy yet. Those guys are coming. Of course, in order to make a fortune from this battle, we would first need to properly deal with the major problem at hand and chase away the enemies chasing us. The Dragon World's dimensional plane was collapsing, causing it to lose contact with other planes. As time passed, it would only become more and more difficult to contact Dragon World from the mortal plane. However, the dimensional plane's collapse also meant that it would be much easier for certain existences to send us something disgusting. 3 of them? Do you recognize them? Of course, the Chaos Faction's pursuers were coming together with the Chaos Faction's flames. Her reaction was within my expectations. I refused to believe that none of the immemorial devils were completely loyal to the Chaos Abyss. As long as a few traitors gave us the dimensional coordinates, it was only natural that the Chaos Abyss would send reinforcements as soon as possible. Since we had main god-level existences on our side, it was only natural that the Chaos Abyss would send us main god-level demon lords and Chaos Evil God. Considering that Chaos Evil Gods would usually have their own divine kingdoms, and Demon Lords' demon summoning abilities would allow them to summon demon armies at will. Even if only one of them came, they would still have to face a war-level threat. There are 4 of them. Not far away, a crack appeared in the red sky. Along with the descent of the holy voice, an old acquaintance of ours appeared. Behind the entire angel army was an orange-red god of light. The Order faction's pursuers also arrived at the same time. The god of holy light's figure of light was hazy. However, I could instinctively sense that he was looking at me and wanted to tear me apart. The god of holy light is only an incarnation? I was first surprised and delighted, but then I felt rather disappointed. Even if he's only an incarnation, he'll still be able to wield incredible power in this world where dimensional restrictions have already collapsed. His current power level is still at main god level. Alright then, let me first exclaim that the god of holy light's accumulations were far too ridiculous. I never expected that I would be able to fight against him so soon. This really made me happy. It's a pity that he's only an incarnation. I lowered my head and retracted my angry gaze. I instantly relaxed my clenched fists, allowing my hatred to return to the bottom of my heart. I'll leave my incarnation here. Although I still couldn't truly take revenge for the god of holy light, I would at least have a chance to collect some interest. The stronger an incarnation was, the more power it would consume. If such a powerful incarnation died, I would be able to directly use up all the divine power that the god of holy light had accumulated over the years. This was a rare opportunity. Meanwhile, the old devil also determined who my opponent was based on the familiar characteristics of my opponent's power. That was because even though the Chaos faction had more main gods than the Order faction, there were only 14 of them. If the devils weren't included, there wouldn't be that many candidates. Demon Marquis Ladvioka, from the 9th to 13th levels of the Chaos Abyss. Demons' true names are all quite long. This is already an abbreviation and a transliteration. Ladvioka isn't very famous in the mortal plane. Perhaps Lord of Putrefaction will make it easier for people to remember him. In the area where the meteor landed, a putrefaction mist was spreading. The foul smell caused the air to become highly toxic, and a tall figure was slowly standing up in the middle of the toxic mist. Never heard of him. A powerful demon lord should be quite famous in the mortal plane, but the strange thing was that I had never heard of this lord's achievements before. This guy is quite low-key. He doesn't have any believers in the mortal plane, but there are at least 30 different types of plague viruses in the mortal plane that were created by him. He's quite secretive about harvesting souls, to the point of treating it like an art. You should understand if I say it more directly. He's an immemorial demon from the same generation as us. I've fought against him many times, and although I've won quite a few times, I've never been able to kill him. Someone who had fought against the leader of the 9 Devil Lords so many times and survived? This unknown guy would definitely be super difficult to deal with. Meanwhile, a gigantic warrior was standing on the other side of the meteor. He wore heavy armor that didn't have any decorations or patterns on it. Even his mask that covered his entire face was a plain white board. However, nobody would dare to underestimate him. He wielded a heavy 2-handed sword made of obsidian, and the cracks on his sword still had the golden blood of a god seeping through them. Just standing there silently gave off a limitless aura of might, as if he were a towering giant. But the next moment, he seemed like a lifeless stone statue, which made it natural for others to ignore his existence. The eternal demon war god, Chaos evil god Donati's, the demon lord of the 451st level of the Chaos Abyss. I'm sure you'll recognize him. Of course I knew about this Chaos evil god. Many thieves, bandits, and bloodthirsty warriors worshipped Donati's. Of the few gods that demons would consider respecting, Donati's was ranked at the very top of the list. And in every holy war, Donati's would always be the vanguard of the vanguards. Yet, he was still able to survive until now, which was sufficient evidence of his power level. Chaos evil gods had similarities as well as differences from the Order gods. Chaos evil gods were also capable of absorbing the power of faith to strengthen themselves. However, since they weren't bound by the natural laws and divine concepts, they could also strengthen themselves through actual combat and training just like demons. Unless you were a noob that relied on the power of faith to reach the top, any chaos evil god of the same power level would be twice as troublesome. Not only would you have to face a chaos evil god that was a part of a god, but you would also have to face their individual power level. Their divine kingdoms were usually located in the bottomless chaos abyss. Since they were neighbors with demons, they would always have to be on guard against friendly neighbors that always wanted to visit them. Donati's only occupied one level as his divine kingdom, yet no one had ever visited him for thousands of years. This was more than enough to prove how frightening he was. It could be said that when considering his combat achievements and power level, Donati's was the opponent that I wanted to avoid the most. Why is this person here? Are all of you so unpopular? He's a loyal hound of chaos. What's so strange about him being the first to come? Alright then, when I looked at the final chaos evil god, whose face was exactly the same even after transforming, I felt my head hurt even more. Donati's was actually cooking fish soup in the middle of the battlefield. That huge fish that was constantly struggling in the pot seemed rather familiar. There was even an incredibly ugly human face on it. I felt like I had seen this face in a book before. I don't think I need to introduce the final chaos evil god. He's currently the most popular newcomer in all of history, the person who became a main god the fastest. He's your younger brother, Abyss Prince Cavendish. Combat achievements? Power characteristics? Nope. He's fought far too few times. Anyone who's seen him before has already died. If I'm not mistaken, the fish in his pot should be the lord of the 76th level of the Chaos Abyss, the Blackblade Fish Emperor Anton. He's capable of transforming his body into a sea of black mist that's immune to both physical and magical attacks. He's quite difficult to deal with. Donati's seemed to notice that we were looking at him as he happily waved at me in greeting. Roland, if you're still alive after this fight, I'll treat you to some fish soup. Yep, just as I thought. Donati's was always like this. Others might think that he was joking, but he was actually quite serious. If we were still alive after this fight, he really would treat me to some fish soup. And the other meaning of this was that he would definitely seriously attempt to kill me. This is definitely the fault of chaos invading my brain. The other half of my soul can't possibly be so retarded.